good EBITDAs, low debt volumes, whatever it is that is specific to their companies, they're really starting to perform relative to financial metrics. And sort of going back to the classic, this is how we value a company on cash flows relative to ideas. Of course, there'll always be flyers and great ideas, but if FTX has taught us nothing, it's that we have to start kicking tires a little more. And I realize it's not a digital health company, but writ large across it's kind of a red herring for everybody to look and say, let's make sure that we're back to basics on the valuations.
Was there any consensus feeling? So, in 21, the digital health market did really well with valuations, but then we saw in 22, a lot of those companies couldn't raise at the valuations they were currently at. And so there was a lot of debt placed, and all we ended up doing was sort of kicking the can forward. Was there any sort of general sense of just the funding market generally I know there's a lot of dry powder perhaps for M&A, but was there any feeling just about just general rounds, and would these companies maybe have to take haircuts or cram down rounds, or maybe towards the end of the year, the market might be a little more stronger? Was there any sense of the funding market?
There's definitely hope for the second half of the year as we absorb. And then we just got some numbers today on the economy, which shows that we're not totally through the Fed doing their hiking, given the numbers today. But the short answer is yes, down rounds are happening. Down rounds are likely. In terms of expectation setting for people on the call, again, if you have amazing cash flow numbers, it's an anomaly, and and the down rounds are happening. A lot of venture funds are having to fund their companies later in the rounds than they would have thought. If they go and plan out their capital commitments, they're tending to think that they're going to go public sooner than that is happening because the window is closed on the IPO market. Still, companies are still going public, but half as many as they were last year. So down rounds are happening for sure. But also there's a lot more hope that the second half of the year will bring back a little more liquidity.
Okay. So great insights. Much appreciated. We have time for one last question. I told you this always goes fast, which always
yeah.
Longer, but tell us a little bit about your connection to HITLAB and Stan and sort of the team here.
Sure. So I got involved through the Femtech, the Women's Health Initiative. And because I've been in tech for a long time, I spend a lot of time at accelerators and judging companies and helping mentor smaller companies, particularly women-led. So Susan Selinsky, who is at Ellipsis Health, looped me in, and she's a huge advocate for both HITLAB, and so I need to give her a shout out. So she looped me in, and I've been a judge now on the Femtech Challenge, which we just had last week. So congratulations to Hera Diagnostics. And so that's amazing. And then I've done a couple of things with the breakthrough stuff too. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, that puts us at our 15-minute allocation. But before Stan jumps on, I always like, as chairman of the Breakthrough Alliance, I always like to tell the audience that it's a wonderful group to join. As whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a student, or whether you're an executive, it's a great community to meet other people within your field, but it's also gets you a link to what HITLAB does best. And if you're an entrepreneur with a company, HITLAB can help you get your validation that you need, especially around your platform or your product. And that validation is what's key to getting financing. It's key to getting reimbursement. It's key to actually scaling your company. So I encourage all of you to join and get part of the Breakthrough Alliance and part of the Columbia HITLAB program. So with that, Aaron, thank you so much for your time. And Stan, I'll turn it over to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Bill. And again, thank you, Aaron, both for joining. And Bill, one question for you before you jump off, and would love to get your idea about what's happening in the ecosystem, and just a 1 or 2 minute synopsis of what you took away from JPM as well. Obviously, you've been doing this for quite a while, and I think a lot of the audience, we've got hundreds of people now all around the world listening. Would love to hear what your thoughts were about JPM.
Sure, and I actually agree with everything Aaron said. It was very much the theme that we saw and heard when we were meeting with a lot of companies, and whether they were portfolio companies or other investors. We do see that we believe there's going to be a lot of M&A. We believe it, for us, we look at it as an opportunity to consolidate assets. One of the hardest things to do in digital health is to scale. And the best way to do that is to bring assets together. I heard this great phrase from somebody at JP Morgan that, the reason you consolidate assets is one company is incomplete and the other company is incomplete, but together they may be complete, and then deliver more of that integrated solution to the market. So we're a big believer that a consolidation play is at hand. I do also agree with Aaron that probably from a funding perspective, more the third and fourth quarter, we'll see a turnaround. I think anybody that's fundraising probably in the first and second quarter, I think if the entrepreneur is smart, they'll just willing to take a small down round, which is better than being sort of crammed down. So it's sort of that live another day. But I also would say, raise what you need. Don't raise, you really just need the next 12 months of capital for now. You don't have to raise, 2 years, 3 years worth of capital just yet. Just get yourself through the next 12 months. And then, the market should be back to, we believe back to normal and picking up again. And that's when we should then see the public markets hopefully pick up again as well, as more capital coming into the space, because there's a lot of dry powder. But Aaron is correct. People are, even us, we're just watching a bit, holding back, but that doesn't mean we're not ready to fund and invest at the levels that we normally do. It's just maybe going to be a little slower. But I just think it's a great time to be in digital health. There's just so much good we can do for the community. So all you entrepreneurs out there, all you budding entrepreneurs, even you and all the investors, you got to play the long game a little bit with digital health. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can be very rewarding if you can play that long game.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Bill. And again, thank you, Aaron, for joining. Really good to have both of you on today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
What a way to start the day off for the January Symposium and really start to dive into the key attributes of what's going on in the ecosystem and what technologies are being adopted and how they're being adopted from the financing standpoint. We're seeing very important inflection points hit as we see a lot of new technologies entering the market, but we have a number of established technologies that are growing substantially over the last 5-6 years. They were founded pre-pandemic. They picked up some funding during the pandemic, and now they're seeing nice growth rates. And so it's kind of reminding us of the 1990s all over again, where 91 through 95, health IT picked up a lot of very interesting companies. MedStat went public. You saw open systems get swallowed up by United Healthcare. And certainly a lot of the algorithm companies were picked up as well. And then, brought in through either United or McKesson or some of these larger aggregators of different digital health products. And we're seeing that on the precipice. We're seeing that kind of movement coming up over the next 3 or 4 years as a new technology stack comes out and another disruption hits healthcare and hits tech in general. A lot of the companies that you're looking at now, a lot of the companies that are attending and listening to this are going to be rolled into bigger companies as folks like Amazon and Microsoft and certainly larger tech companies. Google continue to make big plays, as you saw Amazon purchasing, as Kelly Zhu, my good friend in the digital health clinical R&D side, sent over this morning or last night, picked up a $2 billion ChatGPT company. So all the big tech players are already moving pretty heavily into some of the new things that are happening there. And someone who knows about big tech and is on the West Coast and who's one of the foremost evangelists of digital health is Paul Saunier, who's now an industry principal for healthcare and life sciences at Frost & Sullivan, a great research company themselves. Paul, welcome to the program, and thanks again for contributing today, and looking forward to hearing about what you're doing and what certainly Kartik is doing at Apollo, which is, again, Happy Republic Day for all of those who are either from India or in India. It's very, very appropriate to have Apollo, the biggest health system in India, presenting today. So welcome to you both, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts about JPM.
Thank you, Stan. Really appreciate the intro and enjoyed Bill and Aaron's comments about JP Morgan. Really fascinating to see what's happening. And I'm really delighted to be joined today by Dr. Kartik Anantharaman. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. Yeah.
Great to have you here.
And indeed, a special day for people from India. It's Republic Day, but thanks for your wishes. Thank you. And Paul, yeah, glad to see you again.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kartik. So real quick, I'll introduce myself. So as Stan mentioned, I'm really been a big evangelist in digital health for over a decade now, starting in, well, you could go back to 2009 when I was focused on wireless health, but it was 2012 was sort of the inflection point when, after analyzing the technology convergence with healthcare for several years, I sort of was inspired to drag this term that was disused called digital health out of the dustbin of history from the 90s. No one was using it. And I said, hey, everyone, I had a group called Wireless Health, about 20,000 members at the time on LinkedIn, now called Digital Health, over 100,000 members. And I said, we should use this term because everything we're talking about, e-health, m-health, wireless health, health IT, the EHRs, telehealth, I think I mentioned that. Everything is really digital. Why don't we just simplify what we're talking about? So I didn't coin the term, but I take responsibility for creating the meme, if you will, and branding a multi-billion-dollar industry and really changing the lexicon of healthcare as we know it. So with those grandiose claims, so I guess I'm not rich, but I'm somewhat famous in digital health, if you will. So with that, I'm really delighted to be joined by Kartik today. And I've worked with Apollo Hospitals in the past on a WEF digital health committee they had for a short period of time. So Kartik, can you please introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll go into some questions.
Sure. First of all, thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Paul. So I'll keep it brief. I basically a physician by training. I've kind of pursued business management after my medical degree to look at how healthcare professionals kind of bridge the gap between delivery of healthcare service and everything that's happening in terms of technology and development between pharma, medtech, service delivery, etc. Primarily, I've been in techno-commercial roles across biopharma and medtech for the past couple of years. Have had a chance to work with some of the leading tech companies in terms of, I would use the word digital health, Paul, as you mentioned, in terms of developing both the hardware as well as the connectivity, a part of certain IoT devices, point of care devices, which typically help monitor, you can say, signals from the heart with cardiology applications, imaging applications with ultrasound, CT, MRI, which also help in second opinion or taking additional clinical consultations if the need be. Also, in the recent past, worked with certain patient-reported outcome algorithms, where we are now looking at beyond the healthcare ecosystem when the patient goes back home. How do we look at patient-monitored healthcare or patient-monitored signs and symptoms? And last but not the least, I think the most relevant one about the clinical relevance and practical implications of artificial intelligence in healthcare, in specific settings like oncology, cardiology, diabetes management. This has been in brief, mostly looking at techno-commercial roles, but working closely with the tech and the engineering or the product teams to see how can we make products and solutions more practical and making sure that the voice of the consumer is built into making of the product and the solution so that the usage or the actual use case is very practical and has an impact on clinical outcome in patients. So that's in brief about what I've done. My current association with Apollo Hospital possibly brings me closest to service delivery directly to patients, and I'm looking at how can we bring some of the best practices to actually being able to measure positive impact in patients' clinical outcome. Yeah.
It's a fascinating background. I think when we first connected, Kartik, I was intrigued by the combination of pharmaceuticals and healthcare and how you bridged those two worlds in, I think, a more direct way with digital health, as we've talked about. So maybe you could expand a little bit more on, what you've seen in this last year and going into this year, as far as the connection between pharmaceuticals and healthcare service delivery. I think that's an intriguing area.
Absolutely. I think for long, if we were to broadly classify use cases in digital health, we've looked at digital health being, in the forefront across four major verticals in healthcare. The first major vertical, which I think almost all of us are very familiar with, is diagnostics, or in fact, I would even say monitoring and then diagnostics. Monitoring would include all of those point of care devices, the wearables, the digital sensors, etc., that we would have heard of, which help monitor specific clinical parameters and connect them either remotely to a clinician or to a healthcare ecosystem. The second one we're also very familiar with is diagnostics or diagnosis, basically, The third one is treatment decision making, which possibly started with the Watson Health, and now we have multiple versions of clinical decision making systems powered by data, powered by intelligence, artificial intelligence algorithm. But the one thing that I'm seeing as possibly the fastest emerging trend in this space is what we call, and that links that links your question about the most recent trend connecting pharma to healthcare service delivery, is digital therapeutics. Now, digital therapeutics possibly is the most fascinating, tech, which is kind of very nicely plugged into pharmaceutical prescription, where what digital therapeutics additionally brings to the table is that it really helps monitor patients' compliance. It tries to possibly make personalized healthcare or personalized medicine, as we call, more closer to reality. And now we have published papers published across cardiology, endocrinology, and diabetes applications. And a little early from an oncology perspective, but in some of the primary care specialties, where prescribing digital therapeutic applications together with pharmaceutical therapeutics has already established incremental positive clinical outcome in patients. So I think digital therapeutics is possibly the most relevant topic in the current context, which possibly links pharma and healthcare services delivery in the best possible way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When we talk about healthcare services and becoming digital, I recently wrote a study on the digital front door in healthcare, and as I define it, it's the virtual embodiment of a healthcare organization. So, how do you see healthcare services becoming more and more digital, and will they become totally digital to an extent in the future?
Oh, yes. I think there are multiple ways in which I think healthcare is turning digital. Broadly, if I were to look at some of the key aspects of healthcare, one, I think we could possibly start with the basic, the fundamental level of healthcare, which is primary healthcare. Primary healthcare, to a great extent, used to be defined as family physicians. What we have recently seen is that many of the patients who are looking for primary healthcare service could be to manage an infection, could be to manage their blood pressure, could be to manage their respiratory illness, a lung infection, common problems as we see, much before going to a family physician, are now looking at self-monitoring through healthcare kiosks or point-of-care devices, get some initial vital parameters, get the initial consultation from a primary healthcare physician, and then only if required, go see a doctor face-to-face. I believe this is really helping in terms of bringing down the burden on the outpatient healthcare ecosystem, where only those patients that really need to see a doctor in person would actually go and see a doctor, and it would really kind of filter out a vast majority of patients who need just routine screening or triaging, as we call, which can very well be done through connected health by just remotely connecting a physician with the patient. So we're seeing that really coming up as a big trend. All of this, I think, really enabled by 4G and 5G mobile technology, and of course, fast internet that's available across homes and offices as well. That's one thing that I'm really seeing. And again, you can say the pandemic possibly played a significant role in this digital transformation. If one were to look at what was the penetration of this behavior of a patient wanting to proactively connect remotely to a doctor prior to the pandemic, I would say it was possibly like 10% or in the single digits. But what we have seen is almost a 6 to 8% exponential growth in that population now wanting to remotely connect with doctors for routine consultations. I think that's the initial change that we have seen in the way how primary healthcare service delivery has kind of transformed. Beyond that, maybe I'll just take another few seconds. In secondary and tertiary healthcare, it's mostly referred healthcare. So what earlier patients had to be physically prescribed to go see or seek a second opinion or seek a specialist if a specialist opinion was required. Now we see that most patients are holding DigiLockers, which basically ensure that all of their healthcare records are on a cloud or on a DigiLocker. And it is extremely easy for patients to now seek second opinion or a specialist opinion, which typically requires at least one face-to-face consultation. and they're now able to seamlessly move from primary to secondary to tertiary healthcare referrals.
Yeah.
Again, thanks to that transformation. So I think these are the things that I thought would be relevant.
Yeah, a lot of friction reduction happening with those technologies. One thing you mentioned that was particularly interesting was the healthcare kiosks and how those could sort of, I guess, extend the reach of, say, Apollo hospitals into, beyond your current population even, and reach, other patient populations and bring in new patients to the hospital system. And I'm not sure if you want to expand on that a little bit. I think, Stan, we're coming up on time, so I don't want to go too long.
No, this is an important question. Please do go ahead.
Absolutely. So what we have seen, I think I'll answer that question in a little different way as well. To a great, I think for a great period of time, the choice of choosing which hospital ecosystem to go after was primarily determined by what you say, the clinical expertise of doctors, to a great extent word of mouth, and to a great extent recommendations from people that had been to hospital ecosystems. What I have seen change possibly in the last 2 to 3 years is a lot of the established healthcare ecosystems have really seriously looked at publishing outcomes data, clinical outcome data. And consumers are now looking at, if I were to choose this hospital ecosystem, what are my chances of having a better clinical outcome? I think that is where a lot of healthcare consumer behavior has changed in the past 2 to 3 years. So the way how Apollo Hospitals is looking as we speak is to truly focus on outcomes. It's not about volumes. If we are able to deliver better outcomes in possibly the shortest span of time or the most optimal span of time at the optimal cost, given that we are a private service provider, I think that would be the most compliant way, or possibly the most trustworthy way of really getting patients to trust the healthcare ecosystem and possibly get more patients into that, referred into the ecosystem as well. And we're seeing the trend across primary, secondary, and tertiary. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It makes sense. It's almost like becoming the Toyota of healthcare, because then your reputation precedes you and you become the hospital system of choice for patients.
Absolutely. Just trying to take baby steps there and do our best. Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I kind of liked it. Thank you, Kartik. I really appreciate your time and learning more about your work and what you're doing. And Stan, I think you might have jumped off, but
nope, still here.
Okay, there you are.
Now, thank you both, Paul, for a tremendous interview, and Kartik, again, happy Republic Day, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Stan.
Thanks, Stan.
That is really outstanding. And again, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the Apollo Health System and Apollo Hospitals, please do link in with Kartik and make sure to look up Apollo and all the good work they've done over the last several decades in bringing world-class healthcare to the subcontinent of India, and not just India, but a lot of countries in the Asia Pac, Middle East, Africa. And so one of the things that certainly, as we're looking at the adoption of medical technology globally, Apollo has been one of the leaders to not just help the population of India, but also countries all across the eastern part of Africa, as well as a lot of the island nations in the Indian Ocean and other parts of Southeast Asia, like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, et cetera. So Apollo has that kind of brand and that kind of reputation of really being able to make a difference in patients' lives. And speaking of making a difference, we have three more guests now to talk more about what they learned at JP Morgan and what's happening in the world of digital health. And really happy to welcome Howard Rosen, Robert Garber, and Julie Kane. And they'll do short introductions to themselves, but very excited to hear from this next panel about not only digital health investments, but also some of the consumer adoption trends that we're seeing come up in 2023. Howard, great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining.
Great. Thank you, Stan, for the introduction. I really appreciate that. And again, I'm honored to be moderating this panel with Robert and Julie. Very quickly, in terms of my background, it's, for those that don't know, it's very traditional for health IT. I was educated as an MBA. I spent 15 years producing film and television. And so, of course, it's a natural segue into health IT. when in 2005, I came upon this idea of creating this communication platform for patients and providers. Which during the course of 15 years, I gathered and been awarded 7 patents and worked in the federal space and in the private healthcare space. And about 2 years ago, part of the succession plan, after 15 years of being the solopreneur, entrepreneur, and running the company, I stepped down. And now, as you saw, I'm CEO of Nova Insights, which is really a consultancy taking both worlds, where I do strategic consulting on innovation, dealing with what I call humanizing digital transformation, and actually work with investor groups in terms of doing, for lack of a better term, SWOT analyses on solutions, on prospect companies or in portfolio companies, which of course is I'd like to think, a perfect segue into introducing formally Julie Kane and Robert Garber. And as our time is limited, let's jump into this. And Julie, please give us a bit of your background.
Thanks, Howard. I'm Julie Kane. I'm the CEO of Democracy Investments. We have a strategy that tilts an international equity portfolio towards democracy and away from authoritarians using the Economist Democracy Index. And given that authoritarians' healthcare system generally have poor life expectancy, less effective health coverage, higher levels of out-of-pocket spending, we feel like democracies are better suited to help further improvements in global healthcare. I began my career as a naval aviator. So early in life, I was stationed in places less democratic and saw firsthand the importance of a good public healthcare system. And it's an honor to be here today.
Well, that's great, Julie, and looking forward to your insights. And Robert, why don't you jump in with your background and we can get to the questions.
Thanks, Howard, and thanks, Stan, for having me. Again, my name is Robert Garber. I'm a partner with Seven Wire Ventures based in Chicago. I'm on year 26 as an early stage investor, all focused on the intersection of health and technology. Most of our investing time is spent building what we call informed connected health consumers, which is how do we work with the enterprise stakeholders who have risk for the cost of care, but really with the idea of empowering all of us to be better stewards of our health and our healthcare. This is near and dear to my heart, and we spend every day trying to build companies that allow us to live healthier and happier lives. And before I was an investor, I spent 10 years on the operating side as an entrepreneur, wearing every hat from bottle and dishwasher to CEO. So good to be here today. Thanks.
Well, great, thanks. And so as a fellow dishwasher, why don't you just start off with how do we see 2023 going to be different from 2022? As we know, 2022 is, for lack of a better term, certainly was not a static kind of year. And we don't seem to be going that way for this year already.
Look, it's going to be a mixed year. I know some of us were at JPM a couple of weeks ago. It was certainly more subdued than normal. Economic news continues to be mixed. Yesterday, we had some positive economic news on the jobs front and economic growth, but we're still seeing a lot of the systemic challenges in the healthcare systems. Labor costs are still up 20-25%. Inflation is high. And so I think we still have some choppy waters to get through this year. The positive, it's a good time to be investing. Prices have gone down. They're more mature assets to be added to the portfolio, but I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
Okay. And Julie?
Yeah, so we're hearing that hospitals have been operating at a 50 to 70% loss in 2022, and are at the same time seeing a slowdown in the venture investing world, although while the later stage had seen significant drop off, there's still some investing in the seed stage, so that they're still investing in exploration. Obviously, we learned that COVID has strained healthcare systems and worker conditions are a challenge. And with the global economic slowdown, as Robert just mentioned, I think it's going to be challenging for spending. It will fall in terms of real terms because of inflation. And on top of that, with the shifting of supply chains, where I think we're going to see an increase in drug makers' cost, and it'll be challenging for the next year.
Well, as I said, as we try to help prevent some of the people from getting their 7th cup of coffee or jumping out the windows beside themselves. Why don't we mix up? So what is the there's many areas of issue and concern. Where would you see is the one area of concern that companies should be looking out for, that you think the investment in communities going to be looking for? But at the same time, let's balance that out with what you see as the opportunities. So Julie, if you want to take that to start with.
Well, I think as exemplified by the JP Morgan Chase conference, bringing together the private and public sector and innovators to solve these issues. And that's where, when we have innovation and dramatic change and folks taking risks to solve these issues, I think that's where the optimism can be. 8,000 people showed up 3 years after COVID. That I think that exemplifies collaboration. Again, I'm pro-democracy, so I like to celebrate those types of trends.
So that's great. There's no question collaboration seems to be on everyone's mind and sort of discussed when you sort of create that portfolio of companies within companies to sort of hedge some of those investments. So Robert, again, same kind of question to you. What is of many, what are the more specific area of concern you're looking at, but at the same time, what sort of a sunnier, hopeful opportunity do you present or see as well?
Look, the good news, from my perspective, having been through a few of these cycles before, is that we're reverting back to fundamentals, right? That people are starting to think about unit economics, ROI, and hard dollar ROI, not soft dollar ROI, like increased productivity, which is very hard to measure, and a real focus on outcomes and cost reductions. And so I think that we're back in an era where the metrics matter, right? And those companies that are able to demonstrate, quantifiable results are going to have success. So to me, that's a good thing. But we spent a lot of time in our portfolio helping our companies understand that, this is a data-driven world right now, and that you're going to need to show real hard results, to continue to attract capital and customers. In terms of, the greener side of the equation, there's still, we're still at the really early days of what this digital transformation looks like, right? I'm a firm believer that in a few years from now, there won't be digital health, it'll just be health. And so really we're thinking about how do we integrate all these different care modalities, locations of care, hybrid models with online, offline, AI technologies, wearables. I mean, we've got sort of this whole new tool set that we never really had before the last 5-10 years. And I think it's going to be transformative. I mean, certainly we have plenty of wood to chop when we think about chronic disease, acute conditions, even delays in care that were caused by the pandemic. So no lack of issues to focus on, but I think a lot of opportunity to have impact. And it's necessary. Like, we need to focus on driving impact at scale, not incrementalism.
And that actually ties into a lot, as I mentioned, the work I do is with, humanizing digital transformation, which is just, you're not bolting on technology. You actually need to involve the stakeholders in that process to ensure it's going to be used, and get and collect data, but also the real data that actually is actionable. So with that, and obviously because health apparently involves people, so I'm sort of curious as to what your sort of thoughts were as Stan led in terms of consumer adoption. Like, what is the one thing you're sort of seeing or would like, in terms of that consumer side, since people really need to use this to be successful?
I mean, look, that's the magic question, right? Is we're still learning as an industry how to empower consumers. And let me be clear, I'd use the word empower, not engage. Engage is the idea of somebody else trying to get you to do what they want you to do, right? Texting me 10 times a day and reminding me to check my BP only reminds me that I have a chronic disease. That doesn't make me want to be more compliant with my treatment regimen. So the idea really is to create empowerment, right? Connect the dots for people between, the data and the action, as you said, Howard, so that people can see the causal relationship, right? Like, what's your experience there? You go to the doctor says, oh, you're overweight, you have hypertension, and you're hypolipidemic. And so you need to lose 50 pounds, start working out 3 days a week, and change all your diet. Like nobody can comply with that kind of, set of doctor requirements. So we have a lot to learn around creating longitudinal consumer adoption and behavioral change. And that's the hard part. I mean, I wish I could say we've all cracked the code there, but that's the hard part.
That's great. It's okay with the 30 seconds, Julie, just for your thoughts on that, because
Yeah, well, I think this ties in beautifully to the previous panel and the focus on, a system that measures outcomes, and the more holistic approach, as Robert just described, that's the future, and it should be health, not digital health. I completely agree.
Well, I have about 100 more questions, but I don't think Stan would appreciate that. So maybe I'll send this back to you, Stan. But Robert and Julie, thank you so much for your thoughts and insights. A lot for us to think about and to follow up on.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all. And again, thank you, Howard, for a terrific interview. And I think a lot of lessons learned for our audience around the world and listening. And thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Stan. Appreciate it.
Great points of view there, and excited to really dig into some of those comments in understanding what both Julie and Robert were saying about the some of the down rounds that are happening and some of the discounts that are going on evaluations. But the bottom line is that we're seeing, for instance, Sanofi announcing a major new fund in the hundreds of millions of dollars. About a third of it will be going, about 250 million, toward digital health. We're seeing acquisitions occur. We're seeing finance rounds announced. So while there is a bit of a pause in terms of some of the reports coming out about digital health funding now coming down from 22 to below the levels that we saw in, at least for Q1, is trending for 23 down below what Q4 was for 19. So there is some worry about where that's going. But again, one of Robert's partners at 7Wire, and again, remember 7Wire is one of the top venture capital companies in digital health, did the Livongo deal. Remember that was sold for 18.2 billion to Teladoc in 2021, and what that did for digital health in terms of sparking the realization of what's going on. But Glenn Tolman from 7Wire, which is now, he's also the CEO of Transcarent, talked about how all of these digital health investments that we're seeing, all of these digital health companies that we're seeing built are really laying the groundwork for the digital transformation of healthcare that was delayed. It didn't really happen with the dot-com boom in the 90s. And so it wasn't part of that renovation that we saw, the re-engineering of the American ecosystem and the American economy, like WebMD and like you saw with Amazon and a lot of other Netflix, a lot of other tech companies. But now we're seeing it happen with the pandemic accelerating a lot of the investments. About 100 billion private dollars went into digital health over 2021, 22. And that takes time to build. So it's like anything else. You have the money, but you still have to build the house. And so now what we're seeing is a lot of these digital health technologies laying down the infrastructure, and that will take about 5 to 10 years to build. So stay tuned on that for sure. Coming up now, a phenomenal guest, Neil Masha from Entity Risk, to talk about some of the nuances of what's happening within the digital health ecosystem, a little bit about JP Morgan. And to lead the interview is HITLAB's own Greg Bauer from the HITLAB strategy side of the practice and the work we do. Greg, thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Stan, very much. And Neil, thank you for joining us today. Really pleased to spend some time with you in a chat. I think continuing on, actually, when we talk about laying the foundation for valuation, I think this next conversation is going to be very helpful. Dr. Neil Masha is adjunct professor of economics and management at Columbia, but is also co-founder and CEO of Entity Risk. It's a firm that helps pharmaceuticals and biotechs address and potentially mitigate financial risk associated with drug pricing. They've developed a number of methodologies to help with that address not just clinical, but also commercial angles. And so welcome, Neil, and delighted to have you join us. Maybe you could take a minute first to provide a brief overview of yourself as well as your company.
Sure, Greg. Thanks for having me. Neil Masia. I teach at Columbia. I teach health policy at Columbia Business School and actually to undergrads as well. I'm an economist by background. I spent a few years in Washington doing policy things and then eventually spent 18 years at Pfizer. I was the chief economist of Pfizer and spent a lot of years in finance and strategy there. Left 4 years ago and started this company 2 years ago with my co-founders, who are both full-time faculty at University of Southern California, Dana Goldman and Darius Lakhtawala. And the premise of the company was really to try to figure out how to help companies and investors assess how the world will decide what their new exciting products are worth. Obviously, there are really formal systems for that all over Europe and Asia, health technology assessment. And there's many different kinds of systems. My partners and many of our advisors are the leading innovators, I think, in the world at updating those kinds of systems. Pharmaceutical companies, I've certainly been dealing with them for a long time, but I think digital health technologies generally will be in the same boat sooner, if not later. And then in the US, there's this gravitational pull toward some version of health technology assessment to eventually take hold. And so we built the software company that we've built to help create tools that help investors and companies assess how their products will fare in those different systems, which leads to lots of different use cases, including not just sort of value estimation, but clinical trial design. What endpoint should I go for that might maximize my value in different kinds of systems? What is a partnership opportunity worth, et cetera?
Yeah. And actually on your site, you speak to the actual, there's no one size fits all when a drug comes out, right? There's this assumption that, okay, it's a binary effect, it works or it doesn't work. But as your own site speaks to the fact that there's a distribution, every person has his or her own chemical reactions to it. The dosages matter, and all the variability around clinical trial success has to be given greater assurance so that you can manage the financial risk associated with pricing that drug. It sounds like your methodology has played into some of that as well.
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to the coin. There are differences between who's in the clinical trial and then who winds up on the drug in the real world. There are also differences between who's in the trial and how a different population in a different country might look. But the other side of it is how patients behave after they get the drug. This is where digital therapeutics can play such a huge and I think quantifiable role. Really, to give the person the first pill isn't really going to tell you what the ultimate outcome is. Are they going to stay on the pill? Have you identified the right patients? How are they doing in real time? These are all things that ultimately I think payers want quantitative evidence to show like why they should pay for these kinds of not just treatments, but additional kinds of therapies that digital guides can enable. And what I heard at JP Morgan, I think, when people keep saying it was subdued, I put that up to the torrential downpours we were all being washed across the streets in. But the one thing I would say is that a consistent down note is worry about where the US market, which let's face it, funds, a huge portion of the incentive to innovation around the world, where that's going to go over the next 3 to 4 years as CMS tries to implement these price negotiation rules, for drugs, which I think will boil down to a choice they have to make between staying true to the sort of Obamacare era rules around not using quality of life adjusted years, and which really discriminate against the disabled, and the newer updated guidance Congress has given, which is like, hey, we need to spend less money on drugs. And so you guys figure it out. That's kind of the direction they've gotten. So it's a conflict. And what investors, I think, are most worried about is, is the US going to go down the road of most European countries and really just take price as, spending as the main thing, that if spending is high, we're going to reduce it, and we'll sort of figure out how to account for the value in some way. And that's why we really started this company, is to help companies prepare for that environment and to help investors understand what they're signing up for. What is the policy risk around this investment? That's something that I never, in my many years of going to JP Morgan, I've never heard more concern about, will this hold up to the policy environment? And so we're trying to help people understand that.
I think that what's fascinating about any healthcare conversation and about the use of digital technologies is it's a balancing act, of course, between cost and outcomes, as well as patient satisfaction or with experience. The whole notion of the triple aim is about trying to find that balance. It sounds from what you're saying that coming out of San Francisco, that this is a very ambiguous time as it relates to in the drug space, what this means around finding that balance.
Yeah, it's extremely ambiguous. Some elements of it seem to be more clear than others. So there is a clear bias, for example, in the regulations as written today toward larger molecules versus smaller molecules, right? So you're seeing a push, a subtle push toward larger molecules. Whether that's going to hold up over the next 5 to 10 years is anybody's guess. But what I teach in my class is that, politics tends to trump economics. Okay. So, you have shifting majorities in Congress. It's very unsettled, not clear what 2024 is going to look like. And so I think all of this may yet change, but I think the gravitational pull is toward some assessment of value for all of the spending that CMS does, which is, $1 trillion or more dollars. And so that's fair, but it has to be a system that people can accept and understand. And that's where we sort of hope to add value, I would say.
Yeah. I have just one brief question. I hope you can answer it in 30 seconds. I was thinking about the concept of orphan drugs versus more mainstream in clinical trials and how a pharma may go about setting valuation with your tools to work with that. And with that, I'm going to let you answer, and then Stan is going to give me the yank in a second. So
great. I see I'm being followed by another correctly spelled Neil. So that's good to see. All I can say about on the orphan drug front, there are some exemptions and exceptions in the sort of CMS rules that give people a little bit of comfort that they will figure out a way to pay. But paying for orphan drugs are especially disadvantaged in most health technology assessment systems. And our tools certainly give companies a way to navigate around that in a way that I think the payers of the world actually find very helpful, because it's solving a problem they know they have.
That's great. Well, really, thank you for bringing your expertise and your experience from Health Week to our group discussion. And Stan, back to you.
No, thank you both. Greg, thanks for a great interview. And again, Neil, wonderful insights on what's going on with digital health. Thank you both.
Yeah.
And again, for our audience of hundreds of people from around the world, I just popped in my LinkedIn link in the chat box. If you have any questions, comments, want any other topics covered, or questions for the guests that I've not been able to get to, please do message me on LinkedIn. As you can see, the chat box here is open during our programs so that there is a more free and transparent conversation that takes place between everybody that's joined in all over the planet to learn about what is happening in evidence in digital health, and in this symposium, what's happening with finance coming off of the JP Morgan meeting. And of course, we are really excited, as we do on a regular basis, to present another event around the adoption of digital health technologies and where the evidence is going there with our partner AARP, H-Tech Collaborative, out of Nashville, Tennessee. And so just take your phone and click on that QR code and register to attend, again, for free. We try to make all of our programs and our information, our publications and our studies, and I just did it myself, it's working, available for people around the world for free, so that the evidence around digital health adoption and what is working and its efficacy is made available not just through traditional peer review publications, but also through programs like this, where the evidence can not only be presented, but also discussed and interrogated. And with that, we also have HITLAB's own women's health innovation initiative, Women's Health Tech Initiative, I apologize. That is coming up this February 10th from 1 to 5 p.m., led by our fearless leader, Susan Solinsky, who directs the program and makes sure that everything that comes into this program and goes out of it is top notch. Susan Solinsky is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Ellipsis Health, which is a tremendously disruptive digital health company. And again, be prepared for a spectacular program. Again, that is coming up on February 10th from 1 to 5 p.m. We're going to dive back into what is going on coming out and what we learned coming out of JP Morgan 23 in San Francisco. And our next guest is Neil Piper from Luminoa. And we're going to hear Zina Manji, who is the head of regulatory for digital health and innovation at Haleon, which is the consumer spinoff from GSK. For those of you who are not altogether familiar with everything that's going on in the healthcare system. And we're going to hear about how enhancing patient outcomes through digital health innovations is affecting what's happening in nutrition. So Zina, thanks for joining us again, and looking forward to your interview.
Thank you so much, Stan. Really great to be here today, and I appreciate the platform of HITLAB. I am so pleased to be joined today by Neil Piper, CEO and founder of Luminoa. In the short time I have discussed with Neil, I've been so impressed and really inspired by the work that he's doing. So thank you, Neil, for joining me today. A little introduction from you and mission of Luminoa.
Thank you very much, Zina. It's great to see you again. And thank you very much, Stan, for the invitation. My name is Neil Piper. I'm founder and CEO of Luminoa, which is a med tech company that aims to drive value-based care in the home for patients that need enteral nutrition through a wearable device and a digital health platform to provide real-time nutritional status for patients who are managing diseases such as cancer and GI disorders. I've been really fortunate over the past 2 decades to help drive innovation and provide quality access of healthcare for patients in about 18 countries around the world through companies like Pfizer and PSI. But nothing has been more important to me personally as the work we're doing through Luminoa, which started out of a personal need. The company started 3 years ago when my son, who is healthy and strong today, but when he was 3, had a tumor in his jugular foramen, which required him to need enteral nutrition for 18 months. So we experienced firsthand the challenges of, providing care for him with the current technology that's on the market.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. And like most innovations, there's a purpose-driven need, and then clearly one here. And as you look at the common theme that's going on in terms of the marketplace, there's a consolidation versus pinpoint solutions. And how I understand the context of digital health is that it's not about the tech itself. It's about translating the data insights into predictive, reliable information on a personalized health status towards improving health outcomes and consolidating that data in connectivity to deliver care. Can you talk about your thoughts on this in terms of enteral nutrition and the unmet needs, and how a tech-enabled how tech can enable transformation in getting that personalized data and delivering a better treatment and optimal care?
Thank you, Zina. I think it really comes down to really empowering patients with their own health data and driving value-based care in the home and across healthcare more broadly. We've seen this innovation happen in the diabetes space with companies like Dexcom and Tandem, and for patients to be in control of their diabetes. We're seeing this across the board in digital health platforms that are coming on board with behavioral health and cancer treatments. And For us, there's currently nothing on the market that enables patients to know real time their nutritional status. People are writing handwritten logs of the last time they've received the feed, and so what we're seeing is through this consolidation is really empowering patients and giving clinical evidence to providers to really elevate care as patients are dealing and managing acute and chronic disease.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. I think as you described, it's a complex aspects to address. And one of the core problems we talked about in terms of enteral nutrition is about mobility. And would you say that that was a core problem that initially you were trying to solve in what you were designing? And if you think further about enabling mobility, there's all other aspects of living a healthy lifestyle that becomes possible at that point. As I understood, it takes hours for infusion. And that in and of itself is a debilitating treatment because you are stationary. So on top of that, and the progressive solutions that are possible with digital health and integration of the data, as you spoke about, and personalized care, which was not possible until today. What's your sense from the JP Morgan conference and on the types of solutions or integrated solutions that are attracting investors and that are of key interest, and your key takeaways on those thoughts?
Mobility was really a critical component of starting our company, and patients that need medical or enteral nutrition oftentimes are sitting 6 to 8 hours a day doing overnight feeds. Some are attached either to an IV pole or a backpack for 24 hours a day. And we, with the modernization of technology, the miniaturization of technology, we thought it was really important to leverage tools that we have today to create small wearable devices that can, detach someone from an IV pole and live a normal, is the best quality of life that these patients can have. And our son was attached about 8 hours a day, and so we learned through reaching out to many users that others were dealing with similar problems. And at JP Morgan, it was certainly a theme that digital health tools, miniaturization of devices, and those two coming together with big data sets to either automate systems or provide health insights to both providers to prevent readmission to the hospital. It was certainly a growing theme. And for us, malnutrition is a $150 billion burden to the health system, and it was a problem that was important for us to play a role in and to help solve.
Thank you, Neil. And when you were looking at what to design in terms of your digital health platform, there are certain areas that I think you defined on what would be important to the caregiver or in the hospital, like you said, to see what's the status of the patient that otherwise was very manual. Can you talk a little bit about how you determined what were those critical data points to serve on a digital platform?
So with enteral nutrition, you want to know total volume, total caloric intake, ultimately breakdown of fat, proteins, carbs, total hydration a day, and other factors such as activity. And it's all bringing that data together to provide better outcomes. Currently, if you have a child that is at school that needs enteral nutrition, many times you need a skilled nurse. So parents are, have to homeschool and provide care in the home. And so for us, we really wanted to build a mom or a dad to know when nutrition was being delivered in the school, or a parent of a loved one in a long-term care facility to be able to know the health and well-being of a parent. And so So that was really important for us in really listening to users. I think, anyone that's starting a medical device or, any technology, and thinking about that, it's really important to bring in as many users and providers as possible to really pressure test your thinking. For us, we don't want to assume that as an in value of one, our experience was the experience of others. There's over 300 disease states that can require someone to need enteral nutrition. So we wanted to bring in as many users and providers as possible.
That's incredible, Neil. And I think the key theme here is, again, it's not about the tech itself, but what the tech is enabling. And that also means what's important to the user to understand. And will that data be valuable? How will it be valuable? You also have to think about how is the data going to be displayed and shared in a meaningful way so that you can get those metrics. But also, like you said, considering the parents and the child is away from the home, how do you know if nutrition is being delivered, how it's being delivered? So now you have much more assurance, which is another problem that you're solving, is you have mobility, but now you also have reliable data to know what was actually delivered and was the outcome serving the need as well. So I think it's amazing thoughts that have to really come together. If we talk about consolidation, it's really consolidating all of the information that's required, but is it meaningful? And pressure testing, as you said, with several different use cases to see is it valuable and is it actually going to be meaningful and usable? So thank you, Neil. It seems like I think as this area evolves, it's really important to continue to look at those use cases as they start to be applied even to more complex situations, as you mentioned, and the science around that, proven clinical outcomes, that connectivity and the translation of data for better patient care, all critical pieces. Weaved in here, of course, the personal aspect is that robust regulatory strategy to help to enable these innovations to come forward. So some closing thoughts, Neil, on how to actually bring these types of innovations to market. What are the key success factors when you look at regulatory strategy versus a market strategy, and what's actually important from a clinical standpoint? How do you weave that together?
I think it's really important to bring in regulatory consultants early on as you're working on human factors design, to make sure that companies really understand the regulatory pathway. There's guidance, clear guidance in FDA specifically on infusion pumps, and making sure that you find consultants and companies and hire people that have that experience and working on that regulatory pathway. So for anyone here that's starting a company or looking to get into this space, certainly bring in regulatory earlier than later.
Thank you, Neil. Really great knowing you and getting to know you, Neil. I think it's an amazing innovation you're working on, not just the purpose it's serving, but also the broader aspects of the types of technologies and the concepts of integration and consolidation is really coming through here. So thank you very much for joining us today, Neil.
Thank you, Zena. Thank you, Stan.
Oh, fantastic, both of you. Again, Zena, phenomenal interview, and Neil, great work and congratulations.
Thank you.
And again, one of the cornerstones of what we're seeing as we see this digital health infrastructure being built circa 2020 through 2030 is this idea of patient centricity, and what you just saw with Neil was something that really built that up nicely. One of the components of what we do at the lab is to help people through a variety of different mechanisms, teaching, research, mentorship, et cetera. And certainly the research that we're doing around digital health adoption is the cornerstone of our mission. So again, if you're interested in joining us and joining the Breakthrough Alliance, which is a group of investors and venture funds and digital health startups and health plans, and certainly life science companies, government agencies from around the world, if you want to be a part of that community as an individual, join Breakthrough One. And for instance, you can get auto signups for all of these programs that we do. So click on that QR code, and for as little as $99 a year, you can be a part of a deeper part. You're already a part of, just by attribute of being in this program today, the HITLAB community. But by joining and being a participant in more of these, you get auto registrations for all the different events that we do. And you also have access to transcripts and slides. And it's a lot of fun. We also have private cocktail hours, networking receptions around the country each month, and in virtual ones as well each month, so that if you can't make it, you can still make it. If you only have an hour, you can still meet new people and learn new methods and digital health research that'll help advance whatever you're doing, whether you're a startup, an investor, or a buyer. And to talk more about that as well, to take a look at Breakthrough One at hitlab.org/breakthrough to learn more about that. Importantly, next up, we have our own Lisa Crimes, who is an innovation fellow at HITLAB and leads many of our strategy and research projects at the lab, talking to Adele Allison, who is a senior director of content and experience at Chime, which is a network of executives in hospitals and health plans around the country. And the cornerstone for this conversation, in terms of how it ties into JP Morgan, is understanding what some of the things we heard about at JP Morgan and how it tied back to the challenges of being able to demonstrate evidence across the different regulatory and reimbursement frameworks that we're seeing develop through the pandemic now into this new era of building remote patient monitoring, telemedicine, electronic health record adoption. And again, Adele is with Chime, which is the absolute key health information executive network in the United States. So she knows about this from the tactical levels. And again, looking forward to this interview. Lisa, the virtual podium is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stan. Adele, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are excited to have you, and we've got so much to talk about. This is such an important topic. So let's just jump in. Do you mind sharing with the audience, a little bit about yourself and your background?
Happy to. So I've been working in healthcare for over 30 years. Yes, I color my hair. I'm an old fart. I studied systems engineering at Georgia Tech. So I'm trained on processes. Only when I was at Georgia Tech, we programmed on punch cards. So that again tells you something about my age. I have worked for both on the payer and the provider side of the equation. I actually worked for a Blues health plan, managing their provider networks and all the contracts, and real popular, set the rates of reimbursement for a Blues plan. And I actually started the first HMO in the South, which was started by UAB in Birmingham, Alabama, called Complete Health, and sold 9 years later, and is now United Healthcare. So have a payer side, and I worked 16 years for an EHR software development company, as well as their National Director of Industry and Government Affairs. So sat on both sides of that fence. I like to call it the light side and the dark side, right? And depending on where you sit, it can be both. So my areas of expertise are healthcare economics, interoperability, and provider payment innovation.
I love it. Adele, I've obviously had the pleasure of working with you in the past, and I immediately thought about you for this topic because you have this amazing perspective and wealth of knowledge in these areas. So as we jump in, one of the things that we wanted to start with is can you walk us through or differentiate productivity-based versus analytical-based payments? So really getting into the fun part.
Oh, yeah, let's just jump right in. So in healthcare, in our country, at the end of the day, it is all about the green on the mahogany, right? And we pay a lot of money for healthcare in this country. Third-party reimbursement was actually solidified in 1965 when the federal government got involved to provide coverage to roughly about 23% of Americans who didn't have hospital coverage. So Titles 18 and 19 were added to the Social Security Act and created the entitlements we know as Medicare and Medicaid. And with that solidification of third-party reimbursement, we were off to the races. And really that meant productivity-based payment, which is transactional. I pay when you do a service. That's basically what we're talking about. And while that particular means of payment is by no means not complex, it is very complex. It's evolved to fee schedules, relative base value units, RBRVS, fee schedules, complexity galore just in doing productivity payment. The concept as we moved into the new millennium was, let's just not purchase a service, let's purchase value. And this is something that really is moving the industry from transaction-based reimbursement into analytic-based reimbursement. So that means I'm going to define what constitutes value, and a very real thing, a formula that they use is value is always going to be a function of measured quality and measured efficiency. And the most common measure of efficiency is total cost of care. And it's not just simply a summation of what was spent. It's also getting into operational efficiency, use of EHR, all of those things that define what happens as an episode of care. I just pulled this morning, and I'm looking down at my paper, so I have this correct. So every December, CMS releases the National Healthcare Expenditure Report. So it came out last month, and it's always 2 years late. You know, they have to get their ducks in a row. But in 2021, the U.S. spent $4.3 trillion, or almost $13,000 for every man, woman, and child in the U.S. That's what we spent on healthcare. And if we use the economic marker of gross domestic product in 2021, it represented 18.3% of GDP. And that's such a good measure of how much we're spending in this country on healthcare, because that means over 18 cents of every single dollar spent in this country in 2021 was spent on something healthcare related. And they are projecting that's going to grow to 6.2 trillion, or almost 20% of GDP in 5 years. So crazy how it's going on.
Wow.
So, and then when you look at our infant mortality rates and just our general mortality rates, and you compare us to other industrialized countries, we are well below the average just in those two markers. So we're just not getting the value for our buck in this country. So what's happened is we saw, as we came into this new millennium, legislation and regulations galore, and it's bipartisan. We saw it in the Bush administration. We saw it in Obama. We saw it in Trump. I mean, it's not everybody agrees we need value for the dollar. They may not agree on how, but they certainly agree that we need to do this. And some of the laws that are impacting this are TRICA. Well, you've heard me say it, Lisa. I'll just
I love it.
It's my acronym. We're in the HIPAA, TRICA, RPAC, and MACRA Cures era. And everybody hears the bits and pieces. They don't understand how it all fits together, but it is contrived. There is an actual goal and flow of what they're trying to do from the idea of purchasing value for the healthcare dollars. And all of that requires measurement. So the name of the game is data, data, data. So,
I love it. That is, and I love that you touched on it from the different perspectives of healthcare too. So, contract versus value-based, productivity versus analytical based. So, there's a lot of different angles, but at the end, we're talking about value, and you touched on that nicely. I saw one of the comments that came up is if you get a chance, if you want to share that link, I think others we got a lot of data people around here, so I think others want to jump in. One of the other topics we talked about, and I think you can't touch on regulation these days without the topic of pricing transparency. Can you just share a couple of thoughts around that and kind of where we are? And
pricing transparency, certainly. So in 2020, and this is actually Kaiser Foundation information, if we looked at family coverage for a consumer, you were basically spending over $21,000 a year on coverage. So I worked on the health plan side. We try to tell all of our members, just what they're getting for their money. So we send them this nice little book, probably over 100 pages, of what their benefit summary is. And I see somebody's mentioning fraud, waste, and abuse. Yeah, I believe that's about a $50 billion price tag on that. But when we send this information, nobody reads it. And I would even challenge some of the people on this call today. Do you even know what is specifically covered or not covered on your health plan? So you're paying all of this money as a consumer into the industry, and you don't even know what you bought. And I can't imagine spending $21,000 on anything and not knowing what I bought. And so this is where the transparency is really starting to come in. And the regulations are really focused about engaging the consumer. So consumerism in healthcare is a whole new game for healthcare, but that's what's coming about. And there are lots of regs that are coming into play on this that are impacting providers, hospitals, health plans. It's all about releasing your data as access to the member, the patient, the consumer.
Well, and that clearly touches on, and if you want to just talk about this briefly too, patient access and patient engagement, those are topics that I love so much. But that comes into play with pricing transparency as well.
It does. And so that kind of gets into that whole idea of consumerism. So let's just kind of do some of the math on this. So let's say that I get 8 hours of sleep every single night, and I know everybody on this call gets that, right? Then that means I am awake 6,000 hours. Now I live in Alabama. I think our state motto, I've said this before, and this is no slight, is thank God for Mississippi, because we're like the dead last on health, right? I'm your typical Alabamian, overweight. And on top of that, I've got age-related problems. And when you consider around 60% of Americans have at least one chronic condition. So I'm awake 6,000 hours out of that year. Let's say I go to the doctor 4 times, and let's say that I see that doctor 15 minutes each time. That is 1 hour that doctor has to convince me I've got to manage my health. I've got to manage my care, my choices, my lifestyle. Some things we can't, like our genetics, we can't impact, but there's a lot we can. And if I'm not engaged as a patient, as an active part of that care team, that behavior, it's the biggest part of what's going to create a healthy patient. So patient engagement is a big thing, and the biggest measure of patient engagement is the patient experience. So again, I mentioned data, and data is best used when it's structured. So some of the data that is used right now to measure patient experience is known as the CAPS survey. Now there's a number of them. The steward of the CAPS survey is NCQA. And you have CAPS surveys for all kinds of things, including HCAPS is a big one, hospital survey, which has 27 measures on everything from cleanliness to proper billing, pain management, communication, and the CGCAPS, which is clinicians and groups. But on top of all of that, and that will impact how you get paid. How you score is how, we all know when we have a bad customer, they love to talk, and the ones that had a great experience never talk. So we this is a big deal. And then the other thing that's arising from that patient engagement and consumerism is more and more, almost a quarter of Americans now source their hospitals, their providers online. And there's a lot of commercial websites that are out there that have reviews, just like if you went to a restaurant or whatever. So Healthgrade, ZocDocs, Vitals, RateMD. And the biggest one that I would take a look at if I were a provider, a hospital, a doctor, even a health plan, is the compare websites. That is using empirical data off of claims, which is our most pervasive data, and the CAP surveys to actually allow consumers to compare up to 3 different entities. So 3 different hospitals, 3 different providers, to see what kind of experience they give, so you can make an informed decision.
That's awesome. I mean, and of course, all of this, you know, certainly again ties in together. Well, Adele, I knew we would run out of time. There is so much to talk about. I hope you come back and join us again. It looks like the audience definitely loved you and had some great feedback along the way. So great to see you and look forward to next time.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lisa and Adele. A great conversation about what is going on the front lines of digital health, particularly coming off of JP Morgan week. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
And you know, we're at the halfway point for this January Digital Health Symposium and reviewing JP Morgan week and what happened in the second week of January in San Francisco, and talking about the different lessons learned around funding, or the different lessons learned about the lack thereof funding and where people are going. And one of the folks and one of the ecosystem stakeholders that has made a massive impact on the adoption of digital health technologies over the last 10 years has been a group called Startup Health, again, founded out of New York City about a decade ago, and have grown now to be one of the leading incubators for digital health companies, not just in the United States, but around the world, with a number of funding events. I think, Lauren, you can tell me exactly when you do your introduction, but I think hundreds, if not over 500, and a number of terrific exits as well, and definitely on the top 10 list of impactful organizations in digital health today. And with us is Lauren Schaefer, who heads up ventures at Startup Health, and to talk a little bit about what she learned in the 2023 investment cycle at digital at JP Morgan. And Lauren, welcome to the program today.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks for that great introduction. Happy to be here.
That's fantastic. And again, we've got Lauren's LinkedIn in the chat box. Please do connect with her to learn a lot more about what's going on, and follow her to learn a lot more about all the good stuff that Startup Health does. But Lauren, if you could just start us off with a 1-minute overview about what you do, because I've got about 55 questions for you coming up here in this small segment we have. But if you could just start off with a brief introduction of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I am our Director of Ventures here at Startup Health. I've been at the company for over 8 years at this point, about 5 of those in this current role, leading our ventures team and our investment committee as we bring new companies into the portfolio. So I get the awesome privilege of talking to founders throughout my days, and leading our scouting process and the evaluation and decision-making process as we bring new companies into our portfolio. And for anyone that doesn't know a bit about Startup Health briefly, we are on a mission to improve the health and well-being of everyone in the world by organizing, supporting, and investing in a global army of health transformers. So we bring on founders and their companies as well, all solely and specifically within the health landscape, bring them into our platform for the long-term program. Lots of support from the entrepreneur coaching side, a big focus on community and peer networks, and then also a large media platform. We do a lot of storytelling for our companies, and all with the goal of helping them get connected into investors, customers, team, whoever it might be. And then we have funds that we invest out of as well. We've worked with over 450 companies to date, I've personally been around for most of those, and about at this point over 3,000 startups that I've had the chance to evaluate. So I've got to see really early stage health innovation over the last 8 years, and a lot of progress that's been made.
That's fantastic. And progress is definitely the key word there. Tell us a little bit about some of the insights and some of your observations about what's happened with digital health financing over the last couple of years, and then how that's been what you saw at JP Morgan in San Francisco a few weeks ago at JP Morgan in San Francisco.
Yeah, great question. The last few years have been a complete roller coaster. I think, going all the way back to beginning of 2020 and the pandemic, there was a little bit of a slowdown there when we were all trying to figure out what was going on. And then immediately after that, a strong surge in funding post COVID. 2021 was actually a historic shift and kind of record-breaking year in healthcare funding. We track Startup Health tracks healthcare innovation funding globally, and 2021 was $44 billion for that year in healthcare funding, which was double what we saw in 2020 and huge increases over the previous years. So not only that was it huge numbers, but we were also seeing a lot of mega deals. One of our portfolio companies, Devoted Health, raised a $1.2 billion deal in 2021, and just a higher number of overall deal count. So both a ton of deals happening, a ton of funding going into this space, and some larger deals as well. And then last year, kind of the opposite of that, a pretty dramatic decline in funding. It was about half of what it was, around 23 billion, about half of what it was in 2021. And I think there was a lot of maybe fear or concern that healthcare funding is declining and the market is tanking. But I think we really saw it more as a kind of settling out of the market, a kind of recalibration. I think we'll look back like 5-10 years from now and see that 2021 was a huge spike, and everywhere else it's kind of steadily increased from that. If you look at like last year, 2022 compared to 2020, it's very similar. 2022, there was a bit of growth since 2020. So kind of obviously a big dramatic shift compared to 2021, but I think that had to do more with there being an outlier of that year. And then as it relates to JP Morgan, a lot of conversations about this of, okay, we just saw a huge decrease in funding in 2022. What's going to happen now? And I think what we've seen is a bit of kind of the noisiness and frothiness of the market in 2021, and almost kind of the fear of missing out, and everyone wants to do deals and participate, just really that settling out again. I think that there's now also one of the main takeaways, and I know I was supposed to share some of my takeaways at the end, so I'll think of others as well, but one of my main takeaways from JP Morgan was that I think there's now kind of a new space, if you will, for really early stage innovation. A lot of the investors we were talking to and the portfolio companies as well is companies that hadn't raised during that big cycle in 2021 really have the opportunity now to raise seed rounds, and they're not caught in huge valuations, and they don't have that kind of a large deal size behind them. So I think we'll see in 2023, like when we look back at the end of the year, I think we'll still see that steadily increase in funding numbers, but I think we'll see a much larger deal count and deal size as it relates to seed rounds. I think some of the later stage, that the Series B and beyond, that in general, later stage companies are always affected more by market volatility. But I think we'll really see a focus on those early stage deals again, which obviously at Startup Health is something we're very excited about.
Yeah, it is exciting. And when you were at JP Morgan, what was the sense of the energy there for you? How did you, and what did you take away from what was going on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. We talked a lot. We had a couple of team members there, and we had all had a dinner together in the last evening. And I think for the first time, we didn't go either the last 2 years. The last time I'd been there was the January 2020, and it felt like this year it was a bit quieter. There wasn't as much of the frenzied energy. For those of you that have gone in years past, you'll remember like every coffee shop in downtown San Francisco being packed. So there wasn't that much of kind of the chaos, if you will. We were able to really kind of sit down with people, both our portfolio companies, both prospective founders that we're talking to, investors, and really kind of sit face to face and have some great, deeper conversations than we have previously. So the energy itself maybe was a bit quieter, and I think JPM, it's less about the conference. We don't even attend the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference anymore in terms of its specific programming. It's more about being there that week, and there's so many other events happening, a lot of it for early stage innovation, and we love participating in those. But I think it was a chance to have a bit more of a peaceful week up in JPM than years past, and really get some quality time with specific stakeholders.
That's fantastic. And so when you look at 2023, and you talked a little bit about this earlier, when you alluded to what you're seeing in terms of financing trends, what are you seeing in terms of technology adoption trends for 23? And where do you think the which sectors, or what we call it the lab vectors, the 12 different areas of whether it's like apps or digital therapeutics or algorithms, AI analytics, that sort of thing, where in your portfolio are you seeing some of the bigger either contracts signed or exits, things like that, in terms of the different types of things happening there in 23? What do you see happening?
Yeah, great question. We see it in a bunch of different areas. Kind of two that stick out most for me, or one, and this is a very broad category, but really the focused on personalized healthcare. I think, especially post-pandemic, we've seen a lot of it, of healthcare is becoming a daily part of everyone's lives, and something that the preventative side of things, we've heard about prevention and for years now, but I think that there's technology in place, whether it's using AI or ML, to really personalize healthcare and tracking your own biometrics at home on a daily basis, being able to get real-time data of what's going on with you as a human being, and being able to measure that and treat that and manage that. So I think we're seeing a big focus on, one, how are we personalizing healthcare even more, that we have all this access to this data, but two, how is it becoming a kind of day-to-day part of everyone's lives versus, oh, I'm sick, I'm going to go, in meet my doctor, or there's a acute problem that I'm having. The other space we're seeing, and I think this is really where there's a huge opportunity, is in accessibility. We talk a lot about health equity at Startup Health. We've launched a health equity moonshot. And I think that you can easily, say this, health equity can be a buzzword, but really where is the change being made? And I think as we think both within the US and globally as well, of a really big focus on kind of back to the basics almost of accessibility and affordability of care, and what does that look like in terms of, I was mentioning before, the day-to-day care in areas where that's not possible. How are we getting basic care? So those are the two things that we've seen, one, the most excitement around within our portfolio, some really exciting new solutions come out as well, and where we're excited to see what happens in 2023.
No, that's exciting. And in terms of the some of the new companies that either that Startup Health has signed, or some of the companies that you've exited, or you're looking at, you've seen exit over the last 6 months or so. Talk a little bit about some of the more exciting news that's coming out of Startup Health these days.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And we have a couple. We've seen a couple acquisitions and mergers, both within our portfolio and with outside. I think there's really an opportunity. Both we've seen this both globally and within the US, but an opportunity to bring together suites of solutions to create a more comprehensive platform. I also think, kind of going back to the investment piece, that's really what investors are looking for at this point. And when we think about, okay, how are we taking care of the whole continuum of care and the whole person, there's a lot of solutions that have complementary aspects. And I think also, given the market conditions as well, it's a really great way to bring companies together and create more of a lower the long-term risk. So we're seeing, we've had a couple of our portfolio companies, both in the fitness space and in the addiction space, do those types of mergers and acquisitions, and now have 4 or 5 founders that are working together and bringing a collaboration of solutions. We also are recently launched our T1D moonshot. So it's been a big focus for us, and we're really excited to be announcing some of our first companies focused specifically on type 1 diabetes. I think there's a big opportunity to go deep in certain areas. And for us, we see, if back to that previous point I was making, if we can bring together, our goal for 2023 is to bring on 25 companies focused specifically on type 1 diabetes. And if we can bring, at the end of the year, can look back and say, we have these cohort of 25 companies all focused on this one problem, really being able to prove and kind of show that we've made measurable progress in making change, whether it's a cure, whether it's management, whatever it might be. And I think as we continue to focus on type 1 diabetes, we have a lot of other moonshots in the works as well. I mentioned the health equity one previously, Alzheimer's, food as medicine. So really going deeper on specific areas, and providing specific, whether it's from our end at Startup Health, specific expertise in coaching, building the community out, about. But I think going deeper on those areas and bringing together founders, really at the end of the day, like healthcare is a long journey. We're not going to see solutions or answers that'll happen in months or 1 year. It's really the long-term vision, which I think even going back to the funding piece I was talking about at the beginning of, this is a long-term gain. So one high year of funding or one low year of funding, you look back 5 years from now, we've had huge growth since then. I think when we look back in 5 years time, we'll see that continued growth.
That's fantastic. And such a great synopsis. Lauren, thank you very much for your leadership in the ecosystem. And again, thank you for all the good work that Startup Health is doing.
Thank you, Stan. And thanks to HITLAB for hosting this.
What a tremendous opinion and great insights as to what's going on in digital health adoption, what's happening with financing, and what we learned from JP Morgan. Lauren summed it up perfectly there. And again, I recommend anyone who's not a part of the Startup Health ecosystem, take a look at what they're doing. Lots of good work in helping stand up digital health startups and helping them become adopted in the ecosystem around healthcare. And another big ecosystem stakeholder, as many of you know, is a law firm called certainly Goodwin Procter, and Lily Wound, who's a partner with Goodwin, is with us today to dive into some of what we found out from JP Morgan in the policy and regulatory area. And as we heard earlier this morning, or in this program, it was the morning at that point, I think it was in the 11:30 segment, we heard about just how much the regulatory and reimbursement landscape is shifting. We saw a massive shift with the rise of the pandemic, where all of a sudden state policymakers and health IT leaders, digital health leaders, were talking very specifically about how to reimburse more remote care. FDA and CMS, and HHS were talking about how to make sure we could do more virtual clinical trials. And so we see now this level setting of what's going on in digital health and state policy and federal policies around digital health. And to dive into that, Lily is going to interview Deanne Primzoic from Change Healthcare. And so again, thank you both for joining. And Lily, handing the virtual stage over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I think we have some very interesting thoughts around health equity. I think we will start with that, and then we'll go into talking about personalized healthcare, which was the subject raised on the prior talk. And so just to give everybody, to introduce myself to everybody, I'm a partner at Goodwin. I'm in the life sciences group. I've been working on a lot of AI deals and precision medicine, and happy to talk about that towards the end. But first of all, I want to introduce Deanne Chasm at Change Healthcare. And Deanne, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lily. Yes, Deanne Primzoic Kasim. I'm actually in the middle of a name change, but I am happy to be here. And I have run health policy and advocacy for Change Healthcare for the last 5 years. And actually, one of the areas that we've seen a lot of policy change has been in the use and application of AI and ML. So happy to talk with you today.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. The first question for, I think, our audience, I think everybody, has heard about healthcare equity and that there's been interest in creation of policy. Maybe you could give us an overview of what the current state of policy is right now around use of healthcare and AI.
Sure, happy to. So often the technology is ahead of regulatory policy, and that is no exception with AI and machine learning. From our perspective, particularly in the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen a lot of technological advancement with AI. No doubt there is really unlimited potential for the many applications in healthcare. However, with that, we've seen also some studies that have come out and some real concern about the potential for bias and or discrimination in the use of those algorithms and the use of those data sets, whether it's data sets to train the algorithms or actual live data sets used in production. And a lot of this is really come out from, in 2019, there were some articles in Science and Nature that looked at algorithms that would predict future costs of care, needs for resources, getting folks into appropriate programs. And what we found is some of the algorithms did have some unintended bias, perhaps, in terms of looking at historical data and not necessarily being as predictive as they would like. And unfortunately, when you have algorithms that may not be looking at the whole picture, you run into the unintended consequences of, well, maybe we're not serving the underserved as best we can, or maybe we're accidentally discriminating against some underserved or minority populations. And so that's when you really have this focus on how do we have better checks for bias, both in data sets and in AI? How do we make sure that they're equitable? How do we make sure that the folks that are developing those algorithms have good representation from all sectors and all demographics? So we've seen since then that industry stakeholders across just all of healthcare have looked at how do we have best practices? How do we really determine what is an unbiased algorithm? How do we look at just the fact that we're all human? Humans have unintended bias, we have unconscious and conscious bias, and humans are the ones making these algorithms, right? And they're the ones who will be hopefully interfacing with those algorithms once they're in production in some sort of healthcare software system. So I think we've had a real holistic approach at looking at how do we, number one, look at what's best practices, how do we put some guidelines around this, and what do developers, users, and really also clinicians, patients, and payers need to think about, because there's so many different use cases.
Yeah, and you had circulated an article in Nature that sort of, I think, started a lot of momentum towards trying to address the issue of bias, or the unintended bias in the creation of these algorithms. And I understand that there's a lot of momentum now on the federal level and the state level to sort of try to create some policy or some change. And could you describe what's going on at the federal level and then also at the state level?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So at the federal level, you know, federal level usually moves slower than state, right? I mean, Congress legislates all year, states legislate for some of them all year, but most of them a few months out of the year. So states are really the lab of democracy, as they've been called. But there's a couple different things on the federal level. One is there has been a real focused effort to look at what are some accepted frameworks for how you could do best practices in AI algorithm development. So the NIST AI framework has been one that's come out. There's also been a public-private partnership, which is the Coalition for Health AI, which I'll get into. But also there's been agencies such as Office of the National Coordinator, FDA, CMS, all looking at what are best practices, what makes sense. Should we be doing legislation? Should we be putting regs in place? I mean, there's always this idea that we don't want to necessarily legislate or regulate what we don't understand very well, because that could have some unintended negative consequences. But I think the Coalition for Healthcare AI with this private-public partnership will hopefully bring a lot of good frameworks and guidelines and best practices to light using a consensus-based approach. On the state side, we've seen the most action both in proposed bills last year, which of course lead to regulation when they become law, and also early into this year. And it has everything to do with the whole spectrum of AI. So if I'm a legislator or regulator, it's really sometimes it can become like a black box, right? AI can be this black box. I don't necessarily understand it because they're not tech experts like developers are, but they want to make sure that folks aren't being discriminated against across the board, whether it's denial of healthcare services, denial of life insurance coverage, denial of credit. And often those use cases can get intertangled in legislation. But that said, I think the overall focus moving forward this year will be concern about how AI algorithms are being used in life insurance and underwriting, and making sure that there's no discrimination, no bias going on there. But also, how do we look at healthcare as like the next use case? So more to come as those policies evolve. But I think first and foremost, folks are just very concerned that while there's a lot of power for good in this technology, we shouldn't hinder it from proliferating and being used that way. We want to make sure that we're protecting populations from unintended consequences that might harm them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I guess one last question for you is, you had mentioned the Center for Healthcare AI. Who are the constituents? Are they public? Are they government? Are they private companies? And how does it, what's its mission, I suppose, is the best
Yeah,
question.
great
It
question.
sounds like there's a high level mission, but there's it's how do you implement that?
Yeah, and no, it's a great question. And I would encourage folks to check out coalitionforhealthcareai.org to find out more. But Change Healthcare was actually one of the founding vendor partners. Microsoft, Google, and SAS are in there as well. But this really was almost the brainchild of Dr. Halamka from Mayo has been talking about this for a number of years about what if we could come up with some best practices, some guidelines, a nutrition label, if you will, for healthcare AI that says, we've gone through these tests for bias, we've followed the best practices, we've followed the framework. So there's a lot of public sector observations. You have ONC, FDA, and CMS observing this multi-stakeholder consensus group, but you've also got provider and non-governmental types of organizations like MITRE and Duke and Mayo in there as well. But the idea behind this is to harmonize the standards and guidelines for healthcare AI, as well as educate end users on how to evaluate these technologies for adoption. And like I said, it's a consensus-driven framework. So there's more to come. They're just really getting past their first year of existence, but I do think it's one of those watch this space. This is going to hopefully inform regulators as well as legislators on what best practices look like moving forward. And on that note, Lily, I wanted to ask you, as a practicing attorney who's working a lot with contracting in this space, what are you seeing as maybe some legal or contracting trends in terms of users contracting with AI developers and vendors?
Yeah, no, I have to say that this issue has not come up yet, but I think that it will. I think it will most certainly be coming. And it's been very interesting to hear you talk right now, because as you've been talking, how to actually implement this, from a government perspective is an interesting one. And I think I saw some comments saying government should stay out of medicine, but I also see that it could be a long process, right? And maybe there is something that can be done from a commercial perspective in terms of commercial contracting. And it would be interesting to see where the coalition where they land, because I think some guidance here, for AI companies, personalized medicine companies might be helpful. Or we could just sort of maybe put in our agreement some sort of, I don't know if it's a covenant or rep or something like that just speaks to that they'll think about these kinds of issues in their platform. That's a tricky one, from a commercial contracting perspective. And
agreed. I would just add that maybe in your practice, if you've seen it or haven't seen it yet, the FDA put out recent guidance about updating their guidance for software as a medical device and how AI and algorithms fits into that. And often that will sweep up clinical decision support that isn't a device, but now it may be a device under that new guidance, and that may affect contracting as well.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. No, thank you, Deanne. I think the last thing that I'll just wanted to say is, so I'm just making sure that we covered everything. Is just talk about JP Morgan for maybe the last minute or so. So one of the panels that I moderated at JP Morgan for our Goodwin KPMG Symposium was actually focused on AI and precision medicine, and how to do deals, collaboration deals and licensing deals in that space. And it was very interesting because we had representatives from AI companies, precision medicine, and I think where the health equity conversation, I think it naturally falls in the bucket of precision medicine. So I feel like there's actually different kinds of AI type companies going on. So I think in the personalized medicine, the precision medicine, when you create algorithms, there's a sort of a natural question there, you know, whether those algorithms are biased or not. Some of the other companies are focused on early stage discovery, you know, either the therapeutic or the compound, or, you know, ultimately what the target is. And there it seems sort of harder to talk about health care equity there, because at the end of the day, it's sort of activating and getting to science more quickly. And so that's just one thought that I just wanted to put out there. But I think all of this is very interesting. And thank you so much for a really fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you for adding your legal insights, Lily.
That's fantastic. Thank you both for just a tremendous conversation around one of the foundations of digital health. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as we heard Lily mention, the importance of business development and licensing, we are extraordinarily lucky to be working with Alexia Priest, who heads up the BDNL options at HITLAB, in working with our many different technology companies, developing research and evidence, because it's important to remember that evidence matters. Evidence in healthcare should be the first and the last thing that people look at when they're looking at the adoption of new technologies. Alexia Priest joined HITLAB last year after a long and distinguished career at Boehringer Ingelheim, and she helps HITLAB technology companies who are in our studies develop strong relationships with payers, providers, pharma, and others for distribution channels and other types of licensing applications of their products, and leads the BDNL strategy practice at the lab. So Alexia is going to be joining us today and interviewing a CEO and co-founder of a disruptive digital health company, Myram Nabavi. And so looking forward to this tremendous interview around what's going on, what we heard at JP Morgan relative to virtual care in pediatrics. So handing the virtual microphone over to you, Alexia.
Thank you, Stan, and thanks for the introduction. Now I don't have to do it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet everyone virtually. I want to thank HITLAB for conducting the meeting and for the HITLAB team and all their efforts in putting this together. I don't have to introduce myself, so I can skip that whole segment. And so at this time, I'd like to welcome our guest, Myram Nabavi. And Myram, would you kindly give us a brief introduction of yourself and your company?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So I'm co-founder of a company called Babbly, and we are parents' source of support for everything related to their child's speech and language development. I started this company as a result of a personal experience with my son. Between his first and second birthday, and I was a first-time mom, I noticed he wasn't really talking much. As it turned out, and going to my pediatrician, Googling, going to Facebook groups, asking other moms wasn't really helpful. I was getting very different answers in terms of whether this is okay or not. That process led me to really understand the variability when it comes to developmental milestones and what we think it's source of truth versus actually being source of truth, and how much anxiety parents go through. So after about a year, we started to get coached by a speech language pathologist, and that completely changed my life and his. He went from being a nonverbal 2-year-old to putting short sentences together within 6 months. And that inspired me to really think about how can I provide the support tools to other families who are probably struggling with the same questions, so that they don't have to go through the process that I did.
Oh, thank you for that. That's probably, you're so passionate about it, and that's terrific. Thank you so much. And with respect to your company, can you describe or share with us any information that you found related to variability in pediatrics, and also including with that the variability that you may have seen in developing AI?
Yeah, so before I answer that, what we have done in the past few years, we have developed an AI that's able to take a child's, a pre-verbal child's voice as an input and classify the type of milestones and utterances that they have. So while there are lots of variability in the 0 to 5 years, and I can speak in terms of speech and language development, of course, you know, being a preterm child completely changes the trajectory of a child's development. Whether children are born into bilingual homes, gender of the child can have some variability. It's not as much as parents think. And even so, things like socioeconomic condition of the family can have an impact on how different a child's speech and language trajectory is versus their peers. The good news is, at least for the pre-verbal age, what we found was the patterns of speech that children go through are universal, regardless of their first language. So a Japanese-speaking family who has a newborn, that newborn will go through the exact same patterns of speech or babbling as a baby that's born into a German-speaking family. And that I guess, allowed us to build ML models that are able to classify the utterances of pre-verbal children from a very broad sample when it comes to the language, the first language that are spoken in their homes. However, when it comes to other things like, you know, again, preterm children and you know, whether a child has been exposed to a certain amount of language per day does create a lot of variability, and it makes it really hard for families and sometimes even clinicians to say, you know, I believe this child is delayed with certainty and that you need to seek further help.
Wow, interesting. Thank you for sharing. And how can AI in pediatrics help to improve speech delays and speech impediments? What do you see is the strong suit, or, you know, why there needs to be attention paid to AI?
Yeah, so like any other tool, AI is not perfect, but I think what it can do better than humans is to really recognize patterns at large scales. So, you know, every parent, especially new parents, have limited experience and exposure to the developmental stages that a child goes through. So the problem is our healthcare system largely depends on parent observations to report whether they believe a child has reached a certain milestone or not. And that's fine when we're asking parents whether their child is able to sit independently or crawl, because the amount of subjectivity in that report is fairly limited. However, when you get into the nuances of different speech patterns, it's really difficult for a parent. And even, like I said, sometimes for pediatricians, and I saw a comment about apraxia, even pediatricians sometimes either don't have the time in their child well visits or don't have the expertise to really differentiate between what's typical versus atypical speech patterns. And that's where AI can be really helpful in becoming a partner to the clinician to really, you know, differentiate between the typical pattern versus atypical.
And plus, I guess you would also have some solid data that's, you know, documented, if you will, and you're not relying on different and varying people's interpreting whatever is going on, I would imagine. And I bet you that would be helpful in diagnosing, correct?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, I mean, part of the challenge of the work that we did was to really get a training data set that was, you know, clinically validated. The data set for children's utterances was very limited in terms of what was available when we initially started. So we invested a lot of our time in hiring clinicians who were listening to and who were trained to really differentiate between the different kinds of utterances in infants. And that's how we got our first MVP started and continue to invest on that. In terms of diagnosis, I want to say that we at Babbly are right now in the phase of being able to track accurately what are the milestones that a child has, a preverbal child has reached. We're not there in terms of saying whether this child is at risk of, with confidence at risk of autism versus apraxia or stuttering or other conditions. That's something that I think, speech alone is really difficult to just rely on speech alone to draw those conclusions. But it's a really important piece of the puzzle for clinicians that want to diagnose.
Super. And what does your outlook on digital health for the new year look like for you? And if you can comment for you with respect to implementing AI in pediatrics.
Yeah, so I think what I'm excited about is we want to go beyond just tracking the milestones of the child and kind of reporting that back to the parents or the clinicians and really understand what are the things that clinicians will value and will be helpful to them. So I'll give you an example. A speech therapist who might spend 45 minutes on a weekly basis in person or virtually with a parent of a young child may not necessarily know exactly how the strategies that he or she is giving the family is generalizing at home. So as a result of that, again, he or she has to rely on the family's self-reporting of whether the child is making progress. What we want to do is to give the clinicians continuous data so that even, they can really understand how the program or the plan that they have developed for their patient is being, what are the impacts that it's making, and whether the child's, especially when it comes to expressive language, which is something that we can track and measure, it's having an impact on, number of words or amount of back and forth turns that they have with the family.
Yeah, and with respect to this, it almost seems like, given the fact that the patients are so young, right? It takes quite a bit of time. And since this is a session too, also on JP Morgan, is it because that it takes time? Is it more difficult to get large funding, giving that, i.e. it's a pediatric indication, and then number two, the time that it would take to put everything together?
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge with, technologies that require long-term investments. I think we have been lucky to work with investors that understood the effort that it takes to get this type of AI off the ground and really understand that this is a long-term bet that we are making. And we have also, I think, through trial and error, understood that we can't just rely on AI as our path to commercialization. So we are working with clinicians and using the AI as a way to, expand their understanding of a child's development. But we understand that, the path to commercialization cannot just rely on these type of R&D heavily funded projects that require long-term support.
Understood. Marianne, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And is there anything in closing that you would like to add?
I guess one thing I wanted to say is I was in a panel with other founders who were really passionate about equity and inclusive AI, which is something that, keep us up at night. And we have found that it's really expensive to collect data from families if you truly want to build a generalized AI that's inclusive. So I would love to hear from anyone who has ideas on that. I'll leave my information in the chat. If anybody had any thoughts and ideas on that, I would love to hear it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you, Alexia, for a phenomenal interview.
Thanks, Stan. Appreciate you.
All right, as a just a tremendous interview. And again, Babbly is one of those revolutionary companies. Stay close to what they're doing. Follow them on LinkedIn. We're really excited about what we're seeing with them and the kinds of testing and the kind of evidence that they're turning out. Again, as we all know, it's critical to be able to identify any kind of atypical neurodevelopment that's going on with children at an early age in order to implement any kind of interventions, either socially or otherwise, with them. And so it's, again, just a tremendous asset in the digital health ecosystem in the pediatric care. And we're really hoping that they go into some of the geriatric care, having parents, grandparents, et cetera, that are aging, and even every once in a while, wanting to understand how neurodevelopmentally strong folks are. We think Babbly has a tremendous opportunity in geriatric care as well. So do touch base with Marianne. She's doing phenomenal work. And don't forget, they were actually funded by Esplanade Ventures out of Canada, the largest venture fund in Canada. So do connect also with Sheldon Ellman, the co-founder and the managing director of Esplanade Ventures, one of the largest and most active digital health funds in the world, but also the largest in Canada. So the Breakthrough One, again, we'd recommend you join that. And today's last hour agenda that where we are now within the ecosystem, and we just went through the 1 o'clock program. And now we're really excited to welcome two well-known folks within the ecosystem, Christy and Sari, who have tremendous reputations of doing really good work in digital health technologies, and not only the development and the design, but also the ongoing adoption of what's going on in digital health. So welcome, both of you. Really glad to have you on the program. Thank you so much. We know how busy you both are. I really appreciate you joining. And with that, we'll hand the virtual microphone over to Christy.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Greatly appreciated. And welcome, Sari. Glad to have you here. As Stan mentioned, he did a great introduction of myself. I've been in healthcare for about 30 years, have a strong passion for digital health, technology in health, inclusiveness, and helping with startups and startup medical device companies and helping them find funding from the various opportunities that they can be involved in. And then also looking for collaborative partnering is something that we look at as well, not just for the financial aspect, but for the partnership aspect as well. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Sari, welcome to the platform. It's good to have you here. Can you give just kind of a brief introduction and background on your experience?
Of course, great to be here. I'm Sari Kaganoff. I'm the general manager of consulting at Rock Health. Rock Health is a digital health focused company that we've been in the space in digital health since 2010. We have both an advisory services group that works with enterprise companies and late stage startups on digital health strategy, and a venture fund that invests in early stage digital health startups. So we cover all bases there.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I think we'll start off with our first question, Sari, for you. And the first question is, what has the funding environment been like? We're kind of post-COVID in a way. And, VC capitalists have had their challenges in investing some of their money into new projects going forward into 2023. But how does 2022 compare with the prior years in digital health?
Yeah, that's a great question. And probably one that took all of us a little bit by surprise, as you'll see in a second. So we at Rock Health have been tracking the digital health venture funding in the US for over 10 years now. And, we look at a variety of different metrics relating to venture funding, but if you look at the overall digital health funding in the US in 2022 is about $15.3 billion with a total of 572 deals. However, if you compare that, that sounds great, but if you would compare that to 2021 was a runaway year with 29.3 billion invested. So actually only slightly more than half. in 2022 versus 21, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
That said, 2020 was 14.7 billion. So, it's more than that prior year. And if we look back a little bit more historically, 2019 was only around 8 billion. So obviously significantly more than pre-pandemic. We sort of look at this as a bit of a return to a higher level than previous, but definitely cresting over that spike that we saw in 2021. So it, maybe at first blush looks a little bit grim, given it's almost half of what was last year or the prior year. But if you look at it in the longer run, it's actually still doing quite well as compared to previously.
Yeah. Do you think that's going to level off? Yeah. I was just saying, do you think that's going to level off at all, or just stay consistent?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it will level off and then continue back up in a growth trajectory. The exact timing is obviously hard to determine, but I don't think we're over as an industry. It's just more returning to the norm, or even actually elevated compared to norm post-pandemic. I think another thing that's interesting to note that's worth flagging is we also look at a number of other metrics, including the average deal size. And what's interesting there is that the average deal size has also decreased a bit. So we actually had an average deal size of around 27 million versus prior years was around 40 million last year. So also returning to the norm of size, I would say, versus 2021's very large average size.
Have you seen repeat investors, kind of come back into the digital health space, or are you seeing new investors that are dabbling or seeing the benefit of digital health in our healthcare world?
Yeah. And that's an interesting metric to track. And especially when you think about what is driving people into the market, is it, excitement or, trends, or is it saying, what, I'm really doubling down here, I've done this before. What we actually saw, interestingly, is in 2022, repeat investors held steady at around 700 repeat investors, which is the same as 2021, with the new investors slowing slightly. So we had about 440 versus the 590 in 2021 and 320 in 2022. So the good news is a lot of folks doubling down and saying, no, we're staying in, we're still focused, we're still doing this. A little bit of less new activity, but still quite a decent number. So it seems like a lot of interest and optimism still.
Yeah. Are you seeing any increased ticking of the startup medical device companies, or what are the different areas of investment that you're seeing? Are they partnering? Are they collaborating? Are they looking for different ways and to offer different solutions to get funding for a lot of these digital health startup companies?
Yeah. So one of the things we look at is what we call the value proposition. So what is the solution that the companies are offering? What we see in 2022 is that the first place value proposition was on-demand healthcare at $2.4 billion. So this would include things like telemedicine, prescription delivery, things like that. So that's still the first place, and it has been for many years now. So we're definitely seeing a lot of interest still there. Second place was what we call R&D catalysts. So this is companies that are supporting research and development, whether it's clinical trials or early stage research. That was in second place, which has also actually been at the top for a long time. This year was super interesting, though, where there are a couple of what I might call sleeper hits. And that is, companies that had not been in the top rankings or categories, I should say, that then came up the rankings recently. So one of those was non-clinical workflow, which was actually third place in 2022, but in historics had really been at like the 7th and 9th place.
Wow.
And so I think that's a real indication of a lot of the physician burnout and challenges with with kind of employment that the healthcare system is facing. So you see a lot of companies focusing on supporting those efforts with non-clinical workflow solutions. And the other thing that's quite interesting is care coordination, which jumped to the 6th place, but it was previously 13th. So we do see a lot more activity now in care coordination. So that'll be an interesting one to watch as well. If you look at clinical indications, which is another lens to consider, 2022 mental health was the #1 invested space. And again, it has been for quite a while in the top. Cardiovascular was the second most funded clinical indication. Oncology was the third. And notably, diabetes actually dropped down from 2nd to 6th place. So it could be we're at a little bit at the end of a, last year was quite a large investment cycle. So those companies may have enough funding for now. So quite interesting that we see a little bit of shifting around in what had historically been the priority focus areas.
Yeah. Were there any particular business models that were gaining more traction than others? Maybe you can kind of give us an idea on that perspective on the business models that are approaching Rock Health. What type of services are they looking for? And just kind of really kind of take a couple seconds on that.
Yeah, of course. So we categorize business models in different ways. So mostly we look at who are they selling to? Are they selling to providers, to payers, to consumers, to pharma and medtech, et cetera? What was interesting, I think, this past year in 2022 is that those companies selling to providers was the lead. Actually, still 53% of companies that raise funding are still selling to providers. I'm curious to see how that plays out, because as we're all expecting it to be a little bit more challenging on the provider side, going forward with performance as it's been. And so we'll see how that continues. One thing that was quite notable is that the amount of companies selling to consumers actually dropped. So previously we had around 43% of companies selling to consumers, and this past year, only 37%. So it's still quite a high number, but you do drop. And I think part of that might be, rising costs of care and out-of-pocket costs rising, and consumers may be pulling back a little bit. At least that's the perception. So the companies are not targeting them quite as much. Another thing I thought was quite fascinating was the companies selling to employers took a pretty big dip as well, from 15% to 8%. And that's kind of interesting, because I do think that
that's a big jump.
When we talk about digital health, people talk about, oh yeah, employer out. But I think this might be an indication that business model is a little bit saturated, as employers already have a lot of solutions, are struggling with, employee burnout, turnaround, and may just not be as focused on adding additional solutions to their solution set. So that's kind of an interesting turn there.
Yeah, they're kind of cutting down on vendoring is what I call it. They're trying to kind of downsize what they're offering to their employees, because it gets expensive to the employers as well. So as we wrap up our session here today, what were your takeaways from the JP Morgan conference this year? Kind of some last minute thoughts and kind of I won't say predictions, but maybe your thoughts on forward into 2023 and how you think our year is going to go.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I reflect on JP Morgan, I like to think about the mood and the sort of not the words, but the vibe. And so I think that, exactly. And I think for me, it was a good note, because I felt that the overall mood had shifted from, there was a bit of a panic, I would say, in Q4 that you would feel when you would talk to folks, and it shifted to more of like a buckle down and focus mode. So I felt like a lot of the perspective was around, we're going to be focusing on ROI, clinical effectiveness, revenue generating partnerships. We're going to be really serious, get down to business. So not the euphoria of maybe days past, but not the panic of like, oh my gosh, what's happening here?
Yeah, the world's coming to an
I do
end.
think it's a positive note. Also a lot of opportunity for M&A, obviously, on both sides of the table, people paying attention to that. But I think, when you think about 2023, I do think of it as the year to get to work. Kind of.
We all have to get
There's
that
been
way.
a lot of money. There's been a lot of talent. There's been a lot of investment in this space. And this, this is the year for really getting some results.
Yeah.
And so that's what
I agree. And I think really we have to ratchet back our blinders a little bit. So we take a more of a larger picture vision, rather than just focusing on how our companies can contribute. How can we partner and collaborate with other companies to do more with less?
Exactly.
So appreciate your time, Sari. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been great. Yeah. And Stan's on. There we go.
That's fantastic. Great interview. Really appreciate it. If you could stay on for a few more minutes. Again, Sari, you've been around digital health for a long time, and have appreciated your collaboration going back to when you were with McKinsey and all the great work you were doing with Peter, with that phenomenal firm. And I think one of the things that we've been trying to put our fingers on is whether or not we're seeing a roll up this year where a lot of digital health companies that didn't raise enough cash over the last couple of years are now going to be put together with other digital health companies that do have more cash, or if this is going to be where private equity and maybe some offshore funds come in and stand up a lot of digital health companies that do have revenues, that do have commercial models. What's your thought along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. I think it's the year of the roll up for sure. But I actually don't think it's a bad thing, right? Because I think when you hit a certain maturity point within every industry, in the beginning, entrepreneurs are taking risks. They're creating new things that never been created before, but it's hard to reach scale. Not all those companies can reach scale, and the skill set required to reach scale is not the same. Also, you have a lot of point solutions that are targeting one specific challenge or issue or opportunity, but actually combining those point solutions can create something that's better for the stakeholders, whether it's the patients or the providers or payers or who knows. So I do think we will see consolidation, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually a healthy maturity of the industry saying, okay, we've had a lot of innovation and now we're going to turn that into scalable, more enterprise-sized offerings that can kind of survive a little bit better.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and you saw a lot of the announcements over the last couple of weeks, particularly the week of JPM, around Sanofi and Pfizer and a lot of these other major life science companies announcing big fund additions in the area of digital health. And walk us through a little bit about what impressed you the most about some of the funding events that have already occurred in 2023, either from the bigger funds announcing they're getting bigger, or in some funding events with some of the digital health startups that are in the ABC round and they're picking up sustainable cash to move forward.
Yeah. So first of all, comment on the trend you were mentioning of life science companies launching digital health funds. I think this is a very positive trend because, I think for a long time, many of the life science companies were a little bit stuck in a pilot mode where let's dabble in the corners, try things out, see if this is real. I think now there's an acknowledgement like, yes, this is real. This is a part of the future. This is how we have to think about our businesses from A to Z. Everything from, research and development all the way through to patient engagement and, commercialization. And so seeing a lot of those companies take this more seriously and say, we're not just going to wait for the innovations to unfold and then later we'll tap into them, but saying, no, we want a front row seat. We want to really see what's happening. We want to put dollars behind it. I think is a very positive development. So I think that's exciting. I think some of the other things that are pretty interesting are some of the what we call middle children. I don't know if you read that piece we wrote about a year and a half ago about some of the mid-sized tech companies that have opportunities in healthcare. I think one that I noted just recently is Kroger announced a sort of new opportunity with, let me just remember exactly what it was, but there's some really cool things that Kroger is doing. There is a clinical trial site network. And actually, if you look at it, Walgreens is doing the same, CVS is doing the same. You have this whole new world of clinical trial sites. But I think about what is the other opportunity, and I don't want to name names of companies, but what can Nike do in healthcare? I'm sure really more, they've done some,
working on
probably
it.
more, right?
Yeah.
Or, what are the other companies out there that have great consumer research, have great audiences, great technology, and just bring that here and into healthcare. So I think we'll see a lot of interesting partnerships and new technologies around that. And of course, the startups still going at it. There's plenty of exciting opportunities. We've seen, even like Babbly that Mariam was presenting before, there's a lot of more niche areas of focus where we have people looking at pediatrics, people looking at more neurodegenerative diseases, areas that, were historically a little bit more kind of less in focus. In the first wave was more like diabetes, cardiovascular, and now we're saying no, let's really start to focus on these other opportunity areas. So I think we'll see a lot there as well.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you both again.
You're
Christy,
welcome.
great interview and great to have you on the program as always. And
Thank you.
Ari, great to see you again. Looking forward to catching up soon. Thank you both.
Sounds great. Thanks
Likewise,
for the
thanks for having
invitation.
me.
Thanks, Sari.
So just a great amount of insight there coming out of the head of strategy for Rock Health and a former McKinseyite and just a tremendous leader within the ecosystem, and really appreciate all the good work that Sari's doing and all the good work that Christy's doing as well. Of course, in helping advance digital health across the ecosystem. One of the major digital health stakeholders by default, in terms of just being one of the folks that are ubiquitous in healthcare on the database and on the CRM and on the software side, is Salesforce. And Dr. Geeta and I are a longtime friend and a colleague, and someone who's really been promoting healthcare and life sciences for years. Obviously, being the chief medical officer, she has a tremendous stake in healthcare to begin with. But welcome to the program, Geeta. Great to talk to you. Great to have you on and hear more of your insights around what's happening with digital health, what happened at JP Morgan. Obviously, you're in Miami. Salesforce Tower is in downtown San Francisco, right next to where all the JP Morgan conference and sub-conferences take place. About 100,000 people having all these adjacent conferences next to the main kind of 3,000 or 4,000 person conference on Union Square. But would love to hear more about your background, if you could introduce yourself to our audience, and then obviously dive into some of what you learned at JP Morgan.
Sure. Well, first of all, Stan, if I can still stay it, happy belated New Year. Great to see you. Thank you for having me. As far as my background, so I'm a rheumatologist by training. I'm the chief medical officer here at Salesforce, based in Miami, in San Francisco frequently. Got back from JP Morgan not too long ago. And really my role, or people in roles like mine, has kind of an internal and external component. So on the internal side, it's working with product development to bring good products to market and bring that clinical lens to the product world if we're trying to serve other providers or the pharma space or just the industry in general. Because of COVID, my role has also expanded to have an employee health aspect to it. And really have to say, I think we did our best during a very tough time and have enjoyed being an ambassador to many of our employees as we all struggled with that. And then externally, to be really that spokesperson for our products, our services, and as a thought leader in the industry, bringing awareness to any variety of issues, health equity certainly being one of them.
That's fantastic. And then relative to JP Morgan, tell the audience a little bit about what you saw happening around healthcare and with the conference this past month.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think everyone was excited to be at JP Morgan in person. I think it was alive and well, both the conference and of course all the energy and activities around the conference that we all enjoy and get to learn from. And I think there were some themes that are pretty obvious at this point. We certainly are in a tough economic climate. So lots of discussions around cost cutting, lots of discussions around strategizing, consolidating where and when possible, but certainly investments in technology, driving efficiencies, particularly on the side of the providers when we think about workforce shortages that remain a plague of the provider system. But also lots of talk of innovation, lots of talk of innovation, making sound bets that are based off of core business and business functions, not forgetting innovation, but being very thoughtful about the core and then wanting to grow. But those were just the general themes.
That's absolutely, I think, what we've heard a lot of already today, and a lot of other insights and a lot of other feedback on the JP Morgan conversation that's been taking place. And from the standpoint of Salesforce, obviously a key player in the digital health ecosystem, given the fact that so many hospitals, so many life science companies, and obviously a tremendous number of health plans and medical clinics are using it as a backbone, as well as many digital health startups that have been funded 5, 10, 50, 100 million, $200 million in the case of Transcarent. What do you see in terms of the missing piece of the JP Morgan conference when you look at where digital health is, and especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion, where are you seeing the digital health community, and what kind of conversations were you seeing there around JP Morgan and abroad this year?
Sure. So, as far as the health equity issue, I think the industry has come a long way in that we've acknowledged it, right? This is not a topic you and I discussed a couple of years ago. It simply was not as much on anyone's priority list. I think in that regard, we certainly have acknowledged it. We are trying, I think everyone in the industry, whatever corner they belong to, are trying to be relevant to that issue. But I think there is also an acknowledgement that technology is only one part of the health equity issue. as we think about communities and underserved areas and rural areas, there are so many infrastructure issues, cultural issues that technology is simply not going to be able to solve. But for the pieces that we can solve, and we've seen this with telemedicine, increasing access, increasing education, we certainly made strides. But we have a long way to go. I mean, our CEO just signed off on the Gwen Health Equity Pledge. I think it's a great start at the World Economic Forum, and you can see the different things that both our CEO and many CEOs committed to. But the short and the long and short of it is a commitment to the issue, commitment to accountability of the issue, studying the issue, bringing more awareness, asking our constituents and stakeholders, what are you doing about it too, right? There's strength in numbers, and trying to solve it. So I think that the pledge was certainly really good to see happen at the World Economic Forum with some really big players. And so I'm hopeful that we continue to keep this on the priority list.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's certainly a major area of need on several levels. Particularly some of the studies that we're doing at the lab focus on looking at how algorithms are being built. Are they being built with DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion? Really thought about and put in thoughtfully as the algorithms being built, as the AI and machine learning tools are being honed in. So that's absolutely spectacular. And tell us a little bit more, from your standpoint and from what you're looking at, what are some of the lessons learned that we can really build upon relative to health equity in 2023? And where can we learn from what's been done over the last, as you mentioned, really picking up about 3 years ago, and build on those for the next few years?
Well, the first thing I hope we all remember is that we're only as strong as the weakest of us, right? We saw that very much with the pandemic. So I think that's a reminder. But two, small things go a long way, whether we're talking about TikTok, whether we're talking about your neighbor. We are living in an era of misinformation and disinformation. And so as we think about the pitfalls of technology, but the opportunities with technology, I was just addressing an employee group yesterday, and they asked me, what should we do? And I said, for our health this year, and I said, you should get a doctor and talk to a doctor before you're sick. You can schedule a virtual consult just to have a conversation, just to establish a relationship, to answer your questions, because the communities hit hardest by misinformation and disinformation are those that are underserved. They are the Black and Brown communities. They are the most vulnerable, and they are the most victimized. It might seem like a small thing, but I think you and I saw that those small things go a long way. And technology has a role to play in simple communication and education, whether you want to call it marketing or patient education, patient engagement. But the point is to build that trusted relationship in an omni-channel approach, but that leads back to a human relationship. It's going to go really far, particularly in those communities.
This is fantastic. And again, Geeta, thank you for your leadership in this absolutely critical area relative to what's happening in digital health. Having someone like yourself really make sure that it's something that people are going to follow on and commit to and be a part of. So for the audience, again, hundreds of people around the world watching and tuning in, Geeta's LinkedIn page was just pointed inside the web chat. Please do connect with her. She is absolutely passionate, as you've already seen today, about digital health and digital making a difference in healthcare and medicine. And again, as the Chief Medical Officer for Salesforce, there's really very few people that can help at the level that she can. So again, thank you very much, Geeta, for joining. Looking forward to catching up with you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Stan.
And just another important point of view for our community to better understand how to design, develop, and really make sure that we are promoting digital health technologies that work with the best evidence. One of the digital health technologies that HITLAB has recently been studying is something called MediKarma. And Don Jones, who many of you know who follow the HITLAB community as one of the leaders and really the formers of the digital health ecosystem, particularly in California and San Diego County, who helped lead Qualcomm into the digital health and healthcare life science area through its wireless chips and helping that along the way, has taken on a director advisorship role with MediKarma. And here with me today is Don Jones.
Digital health pioneer.
He's been around digital health before it was called digital health. Today, we're going to talk to John Jones about a company called Medikarma, who HITLAB has been studying recently and found some incredible evidence around what they're doing around an avatar named Jill. And Don, just beginning, just for the audience's purpose, for folks who don't know you, give us a little bit of your background and certainly in digital health and life sciences over the last few decades.
Well, I've had a kind of an eclectic life in healthcare, building some of the largest healthcare companies in the country, American Medical Response, MCare, which is now called Envision, largest medical group in the country, MA, which is the largest private practice in Mexico, and a lot of healthcare service providers before I made a turn and went into healthcare technology via Qualcomm, where I spent almost 12 years building out really the beginnings of digital health, and worked with a couple thousand companies around the world in the digital health space. For the last 9 years, I've been working with companies on either advising them or on their boards, and across the spectrum of digital health, from wearables to smart apparel to all kinds of software and apps, and the list goes on. But a very eclectic background in applied technology and healthcare.
Yeah, it really is incredible to see. And I've known you for over 20 years now. I guess we're either getting old or something. Time is standing still, but certainly doesn't feel like it. But it is amazing to see how many companies you've impacted and how many careers you've impacted along the way. One of the ones that we've studied recently and that you're also a part of is called Medikarma. And just a fascinating company and a really interesting technology. Tell us a little bit about Medikarma to start with.
Well, Medikarma is out to change the consumer experience, kind of the front end of healthcare. Most companies that I come across, and I'm sure you come across, Stan, are working to improve the provider side in one way or another of how providers access information, make decisions, provide care, et cetera. Medikarma is really focused more on how do we change the consumer side of the equation? How do we make things better, more convenient, and provide more information that's relevant in the hands of the consumer? And so it's very much focused on that front door of the consumer and how they access, how they interface with, and how they even learn about what they should ask about in their healthcare experiences.
And so within Medikarma, and really what we focused on in our study is this avatar called Jill, who's fascinating, incredibly realistic, and just in, a really nice front end, like you're talking about, in terms of just being able to have a conversational discussion about healthcare with an avatar who does seem like they're, living, breathing across the screen from you. From your focus and from your experience and what you've seen on how Jill is impacting the healthcare system, what are some of the economic benefits that people are seeing from using Jill?
Well, it's interesting. This is a big effort. I would equate it to kind of what Peter Drucker did with Toyota many, many decades ago in terms of making a better experience and making a better vehicle. And this is about making a better healthcare experience, but through the eyes of the consumer and how the consumer manages it. And so the economic value to the consumer comes from first having a better experience, knowing more about what they should do next, and what they should ask their healthcare provider about. And that all comes about because Jill is armed with a longitudinal medical record that's made up of the data from all the healthcare providers you've interacted with to date and dynamically updated over time. And based on that, Jill takes on characteristics that we're somewhat familiar around Alexa and Siri, but still, Jill can answer questions about your healthcare, and it's personalized to you. And so you can answer questions. Jill can also prompt you into what you should do next, which I think is one of the most common questions that the average American consumer is faced in healthcare, and that is, what should I do next? They go through life gaining additional information about their health status, information that's given to them by their practitioners, their health system, maybe an online system. But at the end of the day, the consumer falls back to and is asking the question, what should I do next? And we really designed Jill to help the consumer be their online concierge, coach to help answer that question, what to do next, provide additional information, maybe provide some prompts that they could ask their own physician. Did your physician ask you about X, Y, and Z? Perhaps given your record, you should ask these following questions. We put that in that context so that Jill can become that personal concierge about health that's in that consumer's pocket. That actually is supported by both a dynamic health score that MediCarma designs for the person, and a personal avatar that gives a visual representation of your health status based on your major organs. And so with this combination of visual stimulus, a score that's dynamically changing based on your actions, dynamically updated medical record, which is driving Jill's ability to answer and prompt questions, we created a really interesting front door experience that really we've not seen anything in comparison in the rest of healthcare. This, again, is really about prompting the consumer to come to the table with more information, the right questions to ask, the ability to ask more questions if they need to, and to get the answer to what should I do next.
That's fantastic. And so the ability for a healthcare stakeholder to implement Jill and see an economic difference in their equation, their overall cost equation, where does that derive from?
Well, I think we're early in the process, so it's going to come out in the process. I mean, I think going back to the Peter Drucker comparison, the making a car less expensive happened after they first made an assembly process that had a lot of changes in it from the traditional assembly process in healthcare, and I think that's what we're working on under Jill. So I think Jill is very much based not only in your own medical record, but in preventative care. And in helping answer what you should be doing, there's preventative care that you should do no matter whether you have a health condition or not. And then there's preventative care and maintenance care that you should be doing if you have a chronic condition. And Jill is going to be involved in all of that. And so the reality, we all know, and there's plenty of evidence out there, that if patients are adherent to recommended therapy and adherent to recommended processes in their treatment of their chronic care conditions, they will tend to do better, and they'll tend to do better less expensively for their healthcare payer. So the trick from our perspective and at MediCarma is put it in language, put it in a level of convenience that the average consumer can take advantage of. Answer the question what they should do next, which includes when they should do it, how they should do it from a timeliness perspective. And as a result, we expect that adherence to therapy, adherence to treatment protocol, and adherence to drug medications is all likely to fall into place. And that, we know, there's plenty of evidence suggests will lower costs.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that really does show where the rubber hits the road when it comes to all of this. And so talk a little bit about the technical stack. What are some of the technical components that makes Jill possible that we haven't seen yet in the healthcare system?
Well, there's a lot of different components here, but the keys are machine learning, AI, and the ability to use computer graphics and computer graphic generation in a way to create realistic avatars that create a level of empathy and interaction with the consumer that the consumer says, there's some value here. I'm getting answers to my questions. I'm getting some suggestions of what I should ask my practitioners. I'm getting reminders of things I can do. We have on the roadmap the ability to interface with different things for scheduling. So a simple example would be, it's time, based on your medical record and your age and sex, it's time for your mammography. Would you like me to find a center close to you? Would you like me to schedule that appointment for you? So you can begin to see the concierge-like services evolve so that actually interfacing with healthcare becomes simpler because Jill takes care of some of the mundane activities on your behalf. So not only does Jill maybe prompt you into doing things you should be doing and what you should do next, but then actually takes on a bit of that workload to actually get that coordinated and scheduled for you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And some of the clinical indicators that you're anticipating or that you're seeing already improve as a result of Jill, talk a little bit about those and what you're seeing on the clinical improvement side for patients.
Well, I think the biggest advantage is that come from regular preventative care and adherence to protocol that have been well tested through a series of clinical trials, whether there be a therapy involved or a drug involved, medication involved, or a more complex pathway. Is well documented across healthcare that adherence to a protocol drives both outcomes and cost savings, and so how do you get adherence? And the theory and thesis that Jill is built on, and all of Medikarma's offering is you offer a level of convenience and a level of confidence that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing when I'm supposed to be doing it on a timely basis, because I can rely on Jill and I can rely on the Medikarma app to keep me on schedule, so to speak. And if I have additional questions, I can get answers to those questions, and I've got additional benefits of services. All of that adds up into I'm doing what I'm supposed to do when I'm supposed to be doing it, and as a result, I lower the risk of more complex problems developing in my health. Most physicians try to give people a list of things to do, but frankly, sometimes they're hard to remember, and they're hard to remember on a timely basis. And most people have never had a list from their primary care physician of all the preventative care they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, and how often they're supposed to do it. Somehow they're just supposed to magically keep track of it. I think pediatricians do a reasonable job with new mothers, but beyond that, it's we know there's preventative care we're supposed to be doing. I'm not sure any of us know what it is. Our own veterinarians and optometrists and dentists do a better job of getting us in on preventative care than most primary care physicians, let alone complex care related to chronic conditions. So we really hope the Medikarma and Jill go a long way to solving that gap and helping people stay on track.
Phenomenal. Dawn, thank you so much. And again, everybody, remember to link in with Dawn Jones and pay close attention to this. Is someone who has tremendous insights and a lot to offer when it comes to digital health and all they're doing in digital health. Next up, and our last guest for the day is an ecosystem leader as well, and someone who's gone through a bunch of startups in the past and is an entrepreneur at heart, but also has a really disruptive company these days called Ellipsis Health. And don't forget that Ellipsis as well has a phenomenal leader, co-founder with Manuel, someone by the name of Susan Solinsky, who's been an incredible and really the backbone of the HITLAB Women's Health Tech Initiative. As the director of that organization, Susan has been one of the foremost leaders in promoting women's health and tech solutions in the healthcare and medical system over the last 5 years. So really appreciative for everything Ellipsis is doing in women's health and general health. And Manuel, really happy to have you join us here today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to everyone. I know I'm the last speaker, so we'll try to make this quick and fun.
I appreciate it. And so obviously this is the entire theme of the symposium this month is around JP Morgan. But of course, the audience always loves to hear a little bit about your background. If you have like a 30-second background on yourself, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, Manuel Mondal. I was lucky enough to start Ellipsis Health with Susan Solinsky and Dr. Artau a few years back. And my background was in management consulting for a few years, and really sort of personal experiences, learn what needs to be and what we need to do in healthcare, and really sort of making, listening, hearing, and taking action as part of healthcare, right? How do we make that happen? And for us, it's really sort of using voice, right? That's how we connect. So that's how we started Ellipsis Health, and look forward to sort of really sort of, this year is going to be sort of year of the voice, looking for really championing that across our peers and provider clients.
That's fantastic. And from your involvement and obviously being in the Bay Area, tell us a little bit about what you took away from the JP Morgan Healthcare meeting earlier this month.
It was a fascinating meeting. I mean, I've learned so much from just seasoned, well-intentioned, and amazing leaders. Anywhere from the Cignas, Humana, to friends of mine who runs Headspace Health, Lira Health, and others. Right. The key theme, there's sort of two or three things I want to mention here. One of them is sort of Medicare Advantage, right? I think everyone is worried about sort of what the CMS final rule is going to be. I think that the CMS the Medicare Advantage rates have been generous, and I think everyone is trying to figure out, where do we land on the final sort of say there, right? I mean, I think the Cigna CEO David Kordani talked about sort of ebbs and flows, right? The rates were a little more generous, and I think rates are going to be dialed back in. And so we have been in a flow state, and then we're going to go into sort of more of an ebb state, right? So I think that everyone is sort of thinking through and waiting to see what that rule is going to be. So that's one for sure. A lot of that discussion around that. And the second one is sort of understanding, where do we meet patients, where do we meet other humans who need help in healthcare, right? So looking at how do we come together as a society, as a community, to think through how to innovate digital front doors. Really hard, right? It's a really, really hard thing to do. But I think that if I think about sort of my mom who has chronic illness, and where they're interacting, that's where they're interacting, that's where they're going, right? Either virtual, digital front door, and whatnot. So I think what we're seeing there is sort of a trend for all of us. I spoke with a bunch of founders and CEOs at the JPM meeting, is looking around, okay, what do we do, and what are the needs and demands, and how do we sort of innovate around that, right? Yes, it has been it hasn't been effective historically. It doesn't mean that has to be, not effective going forward. So how do we sort of really understand that, and how do we sort of innovate around that?
That's fantastic. And those are some really important lessons, I think, for our community to certainly understand how that's been building up at JP Morgan. And then when you look at 2023, you guys are obviously beyond the startup. You have a product, you're in market, you're getting revenues. Obviously, everyone's always raising money. But when you look at the financial ecosystem for digital health companies like yours, folks who have that product and are actually real companies, what is the general mood right now for companies like yours in terms of fundraising and getting their companies the next round of financing? Is it kind of green zone, yellow zone, red zone? Is it like, yeah, we're going to do fine because we have products and revenue? Is it, yeah, we feel good, we got some good stuff going on, but we're a little worried because everyone's waiting for the other shoe to drop with this recession? Or is it red zone, like we're talking to people, no one's picking up phone calls, no one's answering our emails? What are you, and how is the current round and kind of mood going for your type of company?
Look, I think that the economy and the world, we humans are in a state of uncertainty. And I think that over the next couple of quarters, we'll really have a point of view how the next 12 months look like for anyone, right? Whether it's a company like Stripe to a much smaller company like Ellipsis Health, right? So I think that, but the key theme that we've seen is, the market has done a correction, right? And so, that correction has happened. And I think that financing is hard right now for anyone and everyone, right? So I think it goes back to sort of execution, right? We've all taken an oath as founders and CEOs of companies that this is what we can do for patient health and human health. And I think that the next 3 to 6 months, as we figure out what's happening in the economy and the rates of inflation, I think we just have to just be in the trenches and really execute. Right. So I think that gives us the best possible scenario for any company to say, okay, now that we know what the market is going to be, have we executed enough to show what the trend is going to be for us? Right. So it's on us also, the things we can control and the things we cannot control.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's fantastic. And again, for those of you who are not connected with Manuel, would highly recommend to get connected to him. He's a tremendous resource, not just in developing and making sure that digital health products work, but also and leading brilliant teams and getting people up and running. So again, Manuel, really appreciate your time today. And thank you for joining us, and looking forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
And so that is it's an incredible opportunity and some really good lessons learned, not only on what's going on today, but what we're expecting to come down over the next year. And with that, we're going to have our fearless leader when it comes to HITLAB educational sessions come on board and wind us home. So again, thank you, everybody, and really appreciate your time today. Really appreciate you joining our session and contributing so much through your comments, your chats, and your ideas. Looking forward to seeing you again in February. In the meantime, my name is Stan Kishnowski from New York City, signing off here today, and looking forward to seeing you again online soon. Thank you.
No, cheers, Stan. Thanks so much for for all the guidance and leading the Digital Health Symposium for today. My name is Jerry Antimano. I'm the Community Development Manager at HITLAB. Do excuse my voice. I am feeling a bit under the weather, but I just wanted to close out the session before we all leave by just letting everybody know about some of the events that are coming up very, very soon. First of all, we just announced the finalists for our Women's Health Tech Challenge. Congratulations to Momentum Park, Fen Therapeutics, Malama, BabyLiveAdvice.com, Othello, Luna Joy, Project Bala, and Herod Diagnostics, who will all be pitching at the live event on February 10th. So please do check that out. I will make sure I bring that up on the screen in a moment. We of course want to thank our partners, whom without any of these conversations would not be possible. So thank you to Merck, GHI, Goodwin, IMC, Colgate-Palmolive, FFF Enterprises, Astellas, Playing Forwards, and Age Tech Collaborative from AARP, of course. And without the tireless dedication of all of the HITLAB staff, we would not have the wonderful events of 2022 and now, of course, 2023 opening up very, very strongly with this wonderful digest and review of what happened a couple of weeks ago at the the healthcare conference with JP Morgan in San Francisco. So thank you so much to Rachel, Yamina, Ansley, Raymond, Vienna, Brian, Melissa, and of course, our own fearless leader at the lab, Stan Kishnowski, who leads all of our efforts. Just as I mentioned, please do join us next month on February 10th for the Women's Health Tech Challenge. The QR code is here on the slide deck. If you would like to just scan that, it will take you to the registration page. The link is also in the chat, and it will be great to have as many of you there to cheer on virtually, at least, our finalists who were, of course, solving some very, very important health tech issues and problems within a very, very important area of healthcare. For the first time, we're actually running 2 challenges in 1 month. We're going to also be running almost in parallel the Age Tech Collaborative from AARP challenge that was looking for connecting health and wellness at home, and those tech solutions that are helping the aging population remain in place and still age comfortably. That pitch competition is going to take place the week after, on February 16th. Again, the details to join for free are in the chat and on the QR code in front of you as well. The screening is still currently going on. We will be announcing the finalists next week, but it has been our most competitive external challenge that we've run in a very long time. So we're really excited to see whom the Age Tech Collaborative will choose as the finalists for that competition in a couple of weeks' time. And last but not least, of course, or penultimately, I guess, please, as Stan said, do join us next month. We're really looking forward to having an equally successful and fantastic discussion this time around the next phase of digital health. So very much carrying on from the theme of what's kind of coming up in 2023 from reviews and insights from the JP Morgan conference, looking more around specifically into artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the metaverse and beyond. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us wherever you are in the world. I know that we've got folks from all different continents joining us today. We wouldn't be here without your viewership and your followership. So we just look forward to having you on next time, whether that's for one of the challenges or for the Digital Health Symposium next month. And we look forward to seeing you then. So wherever you are in the world, it just leaves me to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.